I'm Councilmember Weezar. This is the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. We have with us today Councilmember Harris Dawson, Councilmember Mitch Englander, and Councilmember Price. We'll call the meeting to order. First order of business is the multiple agenda item comment period. That is for people who have signed up for more than one item on the agenda. We give them 2 minutes to speak on their multiple items. We've also been joined by Councilmember Cedillo. So we have 3 multiple comment cards. The first is Herman.
Yeah, let's get busy. Let's talk about CD 12. Let us talk about Porter Ranch land use. Let us talk about the person who cannot stand being in Porter Ranch in Woodland Hills to discuss the gas leaks. But in part, let us have a determination how Susan Gormachang and Jason Hector have proposed an ordinance, a specific plan. I got a better plan. Shut it down, shut it all down. That's what they were saying out there in Woodland Hills, bro. Show up to your meeting, clown. Now I'm going into the next item. Ma'am, can you turn the clock? I can't see it. Thank you. So now in item 7, another one. Who better than Mitch Englander, the Dibble Dwarf Environmental Impact Report. The report from the Los Angeles City Planning Commission relative to proposed ordinance authorizing, as Madonna said, fuck you. And then we go into the company of the city of Los Angeles to adopt an ordinance, 4,000 square foot community room. Fuck you. We've been waiting for rooms all our lives. And yet you bring me out to question this? Dawson, when you film me, make sure I got a good smile, bro. Like your head, Mr. Clean. So all I'm saying is public art, public benefit, for whom? For whom? People have complained about the so-called billboards, digital. Take that shit out of their neighborhoods. That's what they've been complaining about. And yet, Dibble Dwarf sits there ignoring the issue. What a chump.
Thank you. The B of the First Amendment. Puppet. That's who wrote down there in the card. Puppet.
Yeah. So, here we are. Remember one fucking thing. Shut that fucking Aliso down. Yes. And then we have the worst councilman in the history of America. The Dibble Dwarf Mitchell Englander. Yes, 2 issues on CD 12. The man who doesn't give a shit about his constituents.
Okay.
Master conditional permits for shit like beverages for alcohol when people are being gassed. Little pets are bleeding from their noses. Yes. And then we have to fight for our rights because he's sitting there right now paying no fucking attention to the puppet master, to the puppet. So, no to these things. Sustain all appeals, no digital billboards or rotten signs in this area. It is called a Porter Ranch. You do not have digital billboards on a ranch. You have cows. Moo. You have pigs. Well, and you could have a Paul Koretz because he's a pig too. Yes, but on a ranch you do not have anything but the night sky. Yes, and quiet. And of course that gas leak creates a problem because you cannot breathe when you're being intoxicated by gases. But there he sits there ignoring the world, hoping it'll go away, hoping his constituents will go away, but they're not. They're going to be right here. And when Dogger, and I see comes back, we're going to kick ass. No on Mitchell Englander. No on the digital billboards. No on Aliso Canyon. Stop fucking with us. Give us our rights back. Thank you.
For those of you who visit us for the first time, these two characters come to every committee meeting and then unfortunately decide to express themselves in that manner to get their point across. But we've been advised because of the First Amendment, and we all value the First Amendment, that they have every right to speak. So take it as you will. Leah.
Hi, my name is Leah, and first I'd like to talk about item number 1 for the Director of Planning. Your city staff and officials are lying to the people of the City of Los Angeles and the state of California. You're falsely stating the California Coastal Act. It's under LAMC 12.20.2. It's been adjudicated by the California Supreme Court under Pacific Palisades Mobile Estates versus the City of Los Angeles. And you're laundering illegal development, and you say you do not have jurisdiction. So you have cut the hill about 700 feet long, 40, 50 feet high, and you have no inspections, and you haven't collected any fees. So when you say you don't have money, don't tax us more when you're not even collecting the fees that are on the table. And when the hill falls down, you won't have immunity for the California Government Code because you've altered all the documents and you falsify documents. And you do not have immunity when you commit public offenses. And so what I did, so that Vincent Bertoni understands, I outlined it here, and then I took Scott McPherson of McPherson Oil's example of his property, how he did it. And what they do is they create a false base record. This is how they launder these illegal projects through. They create a false base record, and then they layer on top of it many, many other applications and documents to confuse the audit trail. And then you remove out the false base record, and you make it appear to look legitimate when it's not. And so I've laid it out in this report to you. It'll be online in Vincent Bertoni's in your docket. And so you can go right straight through it, and you can see how you knew that he had a geological unstable and a landslide. Document after document after document. And LADBS even told you. And then you issued an approval in concept to evade that.
Thank you very much.
Was that all my time?
That's your time, yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure.
That concludes our multiple agenda item comment period. Now we will turn to item number 1, a report from the Director of Planning. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Weezer and members of the committee. Vince Bertoni, Director of Planning. Just one item for today. We are in the process of starting the scoping period for the environmental impact report that we're preparing for the what we call DTLA 2040, and that's the update of the 2 community plans that encompass downtown Los Angeles, which is Central City and Central City North, as well as a comprehensive new zoning code for that area. So it's going to be 2 community plans, 1 zoning ordinance, and it'll be covered under this environmental impact report. So we're starting that process. We're very excited about it, and we'll be doing a scoping meeting later this month, February 16th, in downtown to get all the comments. And so folks can come in and comment about the issues that they would like to see covered in the environmental documents. And with that concludes our staff report, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much for your report. We will note and file, receive and file item number 1. If there are no questions, we will receive and file that item. Item number 3, we will take on consent. If you could read that into the record.
Sure.
Mr. Mejia.
Item 3, Councilman, this is a report from the Planning Commission. It's a general plan amendment and a zone change and a height district change. There is no underlying project.
Great, thank you. So we will approve that item without objection. So ordered. Now we will turn to items 6 and 7. If you could read those into the record as well, please.
Sure. Item 4, Councilman, this includes 4 appeals. One of the appeals is inclusive of the applicant. This has to do with a new shopping center in CD 12, and the appeals relate to the specific plan amendment, the conditional use, the design review, and the site plan review. Number 7 is related in as much as it involves the associated development agreement between Porter Ranch and the city. And my understanding is that this development agreement has been withdrawn.
Thank you. C- Okay. Yeah, we do. We'll combine those. So item 7 has been withdrawn, so we will deny in as much as it has been withdrawn. Is that the correct action on that? Or what's the appropriate procedure?
Deny it.
City Attorney, you agree?
Terry Coppa, Mesilla City Attorney's Office. My understanding is the applicant withdrew the application
Okay.
completely, and that
So
that
we
was
have no
done
action.
in writing, so you don't need to take
Okay.
an action on that.
Okay, we'll do that. So item 6 is before us. Anybody who signed up for both on item 7, we'll combine that with item 6 if you wish to speak on that as well. If we could call up the Planning Department, please, to provide us a brief presentation.
Good afternoon. Mason Olscon with City Planning, Project Planner for CPC 2016-837-SP-MCUP-DRB-SPP-SPR. It's for a proposed 345,295 square foot shopping center located within 2 project sites at 11401 to 11405 North Porter Ranch Drive, located within the Chatsworth Porter Ranch Community Plan as well as the Porter Ranch Land Use Transportation Specific Plan. The project includes retail and restaurant uses as well as a movie theater and hotel. On August 25th, 2016, the City Planning Commission approved the Master Conditional Use Permit, Design Review, Project Permit Compliance, and Site Plan Review, and approved in part an amendment to the specific plan to allow for additional identification signage, which is not currently allowed within the specific plan, and denied a part of the amendment for a proposed pole sign as well as to permit a community room in lieu of a library and other municipal facilities. 3 appeals were subsequently filed by aggrieved neighbors, stating in summary that the proposed project was not in compliance with the intent of the specific plan and that the EIR is outdated and needs to address impacts on greenhouse gases and traffic, as well as the Aliso Canyon gas leak facility, lack of schools, and then amendment for the 2-acre site. A 4th appeal was filed by the applicant in regards to denial of the amendment to the specific plan. However, the applicant has submitted a letter requesting withdrawal for a portion of the amendment, and that is in regards to the 2-acre site and the community room. In regards to the withdrawal, the specific plan requires that a community room, it requires that a 2-acre site be dedicated for the construction of municipal facilities, or that the city enter into an agreement with LAUSD. And in 2010, City Council approved a joint use agreement between the city and LAUSD, so we believe that that requirement has been fulfilled. And the denial of the pole sign was due to the location of the proposed sign. In regards to the appeals that were filed by the neighbors, the site is located within the Porter Ranch Land Use Transportation Specific Plan, which is a comprehensive plan that was based off of an EIR that was prepared and certified. The EIR concluded that there were some mitigation measures required to reduce impacts. They were incorporated into the specific plan and are required for the development. The EIR is considered the full build-out of the entire area, and the proposed commercial development is within the scope of the specific plan, so no amendment is needed in order to allow for the project itself. In regards to the EIR, CEQA analysis requires that the environmental analysis determine the project's impact on the environment and not the environment on the project itself. And so the project site's proximity to the Aliso Canyon gas storage facility was known at the time of certification of the EIR, and it was evaluated as part of it. And so a recent court decision was also determined that environmental analysis need not be reopened based off of new information after the adoption or certification of the environmental analysis. In regards to schools and other institutional facilities. The specific plan considered the need for additional schools and has a requirement that a school be constructed, which was built and is currently in operation. All other development in the specific plan area would require to pay school fees as any development within the city. And with that, if there's any other questions in regards to the appeal of the project, I'd be available to answer.
Great, thank you. Mr. Englander, would you like to go to questions now or we'll go through public comment?
I think if we could, hear from the applicant and the appellants and then go through public comment. I want to make sure that I take down, I've read everything that's been submitted. And before I even open it up to that, if I could, this project, I think, how many people are here? I know there's a lot on the agenda today. How many people are here on this particular project, just so I can see a show of hands? Okay. This project has been going on for many years. There's been a lot involved and a lot of participation from the community involved on this project. And I think it's one, no matter what we end up with, the most important thing was one that we could be proud of particularly because of, and over the years, what everybody was really unhappy with in the shopping center next door to this and how that turned out for Porter Ranch. And so with this, I know a lot has gone into this process. There's been a tremendous amount of support over the years for all the changes that were brought forth. I know there's some appellants with very specific concerns, and I want to make sure everybody's concern is addressed. So I appreciate you all coming down and getting all of this on the record as well. So with that, if we could, we'll hear from maybe perhaps the appellants first and then the
Sure.
applicant.
Yes, thank you. We have 3 appellants on this matter, actually 4, along with the applicant, and all appellants and applicants receive 5 minutes. All other public comment is 1 minute. We also have a member of a neighborhood council who has a CIS on file who also has 5 minutes. So first up is Susan Gorman Chang. After Susan Gorman Chang is Jason Hector.
First, before I start, actually another appellate was going to go first and ask for a continuance of this or a reschedule of this. We've been through a lot in our community. On the first and the second, we had the Dogger and the CPUC hearings.
Well, it appears that we're going to move forward with this item
Move
today.
forward?
There's been no motion
Okay.
by this committee to continue it, so however you want to proceed, if they want to go before you or you want to go now, either way.
You want to go?
Okay. You are Matt
Matt Pacuco.
Peruco,
Pacuco.
one of the appellates. Okay.
Yes, thank you for letting me go first here. 3 of us appellants are in agreement about asking for continuance. I got a couple different reasons why. The main one is I'm an appellant and my address and my name is incorrect in the city planning file somewhere, and I never got notice of this hearing except by word of mouth last week. I put in your file the city document I got from Edwin at the city clerk's office. They're both aware that my name and address are wrong only in that mailing list. Everywhere else, it's right. So I attached my business cards so you can see the correct information. So I think that this alone is reason for a postponement because I have limited preparation considering also that I live in the community that's been pretty much upended by the gas leak. So you also see in the file I gave you, I emailed a request for a postponement to all the elected officials in the area, obviously late because I didn't get a notice of this hearing. This is a complex matter and I would like to be much more prepared for you guys, but you know, we were in the middle of these critical hearings last week and of the Porter Ranch gas disaster, and I would like to be properly prepared to give you guys a whole bunch of input on how we can make this project much better project for the neighborhood. Also, the hearings that we just went through and the gas disaster, Mr. Englander, city council member as well, he's well aware of what we've been through. We've seen him on TV talking about how much this community has been affected, everything we've been through. He was at the hearings just last week saying the same thing, how much we've been through. And then his own city council passed a motion to slow the opening of that facility until we know why it blew up in the first place. So clearly, to have these hearings, this hearing, right on the heels of probably the most important, impactful thing to go on in these people's lives, maybe ever, is pretty much a burden. We would have a lot more people down here if we just didn't have two meetings times 500 people last week at those hearings about the gas facility. So we're pretty overburdened, and so with respect for all the other appellants that are here and the 3 other people that showed up about this, I do request that we continue this, and we will have a lot more input from the community once the community has a chance to take a breather, no pun intended, and actually know about this hearing, prepare for this hearing, and be at this hearing. Thank you. And lastly, I don't know what you guys are going to decide right now, but I also included a small preview of part of my appeal, which relates to a San Diego court case, a California Court of Appeals, which showed that the 2 parties in that case, the one party trying to do the development, they violated state law by failing to fully account for and take steps to reduce greenhouse gases and harmful air pollution in their environmental review, mostly revolving around California SB 375, and I haven't seen anything in the Chappelle documents that they've fully addressed the greenhouse gas which is required by the state. That's it. Thank you.
Susan Gorman-Chang. After Ms. Gorman-Chang is Jason Hector.
Ready? I'm Susan Gorman-Chang. I'm here as a resident of Porter Ranch. Let me say that I am not against the development called the Village, but we have a responsibility for the health and well-being of our children and grandchildren. Decisions we make now about this development affect the entire city of Los Angeles because bad air quality travels. We saw that with a well blowout in Aliso Canyon, whose 100,000 tons of methane affected the global climate change. This is not just about us. The one thing and the one responsibility we all have in common is our air. From Porter Ranch to Baldwin Hills to Boyle Heights to downtown LA, we all breathe and share the air. We cannot be so selfish to think otherwise. We can do this development in a smart, sustainable way. You have my appeals letter dated November 23, 2016, so I'm just going to touch on some updates. The first update is a Supreme Court case, California Building Industry Association v. Bay Area AQMD, December 2015, which found CEQA does mandate an analysis of how a project might exacerbate existing environmental hazards. This existing environmental hazard is in our backyard, and it's a Aliso Canyon gas storage facility, which even as it is closed, continues to off-gas methane, which mixes with volatile organic compounds to create smog. I have it right here on my smartphone, fenceline.org. So if and when that facility reopens, that effect will increase exponentially. The cumulative effect of the proposed development, the Village, in the same area as a Aliso Canyon gas storage facility has not been addressed by any of the EIR documents or addendums and needs to be per the recent Supreme Court case. Second, the Village's plan lacks sufficient evidence that the development and its associated traffic greenhouse gas emissions would not be significant. The Village may serve to help derail AB 32 if not done correctly. AB 32 is a state law which stipulates we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990 levels, which is a substantial decrease from where we are today even without the Village. In another Supreme Court case, Center for Biological Diversity v. Department of Fish and Wildlife, aka the Newell Ranch development, the court found that the developer's EIR, quote, lacks substantial evidence to support a finding that emissions would not be significant. Further, it found that a development simply designed to meet higher building efficiency and conservation standards, as the developer Chappelle's addendum puts forth, does not establish that its greenhouse gas emissions from transportation activities lack significant impacts. Quote, indeed, it seems that new development must be more greenhouse gas efficient than the average, given that the past and current sources of emissions, which is substantially less efficient than this average, will continue to exist and emit. This precedent set by the Supreme Court can be applied to the village. Third, SB 375, which is the nation's first law to associate global warming with land use, planning, and transportation. Like AB 32, this is a state law, and following it is not optional. Under SB 375, developers can get some relief from certain environmental review requirements if under CEQA, if their project are consistent with the limits and policies specified in a region's sustainable communities plan. LA has a sustainability plan with targets to decrease vehicle miles driven, increase public transportation, and electric vehicle use. But the village has not yet demonstrated that it is consistent with this plan. The mere existence of LA's sustainability plan does not let the village off the hook. It must show how it is consistent with that plan. So let's give them a chance to do that. And this chance is already in Section 9F of the specific plan for our community that stipulates the formation of a transport management organization and shared ride transportation system. Have these been forgotten and never formed? I suggest that we form this TMO and shared ride transportation system, incorporating services such as, for example, WAVE, which gives free 2-hour electric car usage, and perhaps an electric trolley, and allow members from Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council to sit on that organization's board. That may help the village comply to our sustainability plan for LA, thereby helping it comply to 375. In summary, we have 2 Supreme Court cases setting precedents and 2 state laws that need to be followed. I recommend Plum reject the permit until the developer comes quickly back with a plan to ensure compliance and sustainability for the village. Newhall Ranch, after their defeat in the Supreme Court case, announced their commitment to a net zero community, which usually means a development will create as much energy from clean sources, such as solar and wind, as it uses. I suggest the developers of the village do the same, and I will be willing to work with you. Or, in the alternative, they may end up facing legal precedents of 2 Supreme Court cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Hector. After Mr. Hector is John Love.
Hello. Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I just want to say, personally, I do concur with what Mitchell Englander said regarding the village, and that land has been sitting there for a very long time. My appeal is not against the village per se, but against the public benefits that have not been provided to the community as negotiated long ago between developers, the city, in the development agreement, and the specific plan. Specifically, the 2-acre site for dedication of the library and or municipal facilities. At the last hearing with city planning, the city planning's intent was to ensure that the 2-acre site would be made available for the community and the city should they need it in the future. Now, this particular site is required to be dedicated to the city. Now, my packet is the one with the clip on it, and I'd like, if you would go through it, I'd like to show you some of the portions in there where it discusses regarding the 2 acres. Unfortunately, it looks like, hopefully you have time to review it, but one of the requirements of the specific plan is that a 2-acre site be dedicated to the city. This is extremely valuable land. This site has not been dedicated yet, and it seems that they've been dragging their feet in making that happen. And this development agreement is supposed to guarantee that these public benefits be provided. And so I'm calling upon your body to preserve these public benefits that are so important to our community. We've suffered so much, and this is only what was promised. I'm only asking for what was promised. The community center and the 2 acres, okay? I'm not happy about the 24 bars, the 24 alcohol establishments, but I'm not complaining about that, okay? If they want to do that, that's their right. But the 2-acre site was something that was negotiated 20, 30 years ago for a public library and municipal facility with the vision that we could possibly have the councilman's office there, the county supervisor there, that we could have a place for people to gather, seniors, whoever, to have a facility owned by the city that could be used for public benefit. And the purpose is because we have almost 1,800 new homes coming in on the west side of Porter Ranch. The purpose was for that 2-acre site to be there for that community that is in the process of developing over the next 5 years. We all know the development that's going on with Toll Brothers. They're building, these large homes. So we need the proper infrastructure and public services in our community. So I do agree that the village is long overdue, and who doesn't like going to, restaurants and bars and movie theaters? We all do. But the point is, hold them to the agreement. This 2 acres is city property. Deed it to the city. Now they're gonna get up and say that there was a joint use agreement. I did the research and I provided you all a copy with it, and I handed it to May at City Planning. The joint use agreement was signed after the breaking ground of the facility, and that's what the language reads. The language reads that if the joint use agreement is not signed prior to breaking ground on the school, and I've put a printout of that, it's June 2010, the school broke ground. The joint use agreement was signed in September, afterwards. In addition to that, that joint use agreement has nothing to do with 2 acres. That joint use agreement only allows us to use the community room at the school. That's it, which we already can do by law. Anybody can go and use a school by law. So there's no public benefit being provided by that joint use agreement. The joint use agreement could have put the 2 acres at the school site, but it's not. That 2 acres was not deeded to the city, and that is required per the development agreement. So I ask city planning or anybody to show me where the 2 acres was deeded to the city. We're still looking for it. So I ask you to consider. And the community room is, I'm hopeful it's still in the project, but we do need that community room. That community room is so important. City Planning Commission agreed to keep the community room as part of the project so we don't have to share this school and we can have a meeting place. Thank you.
Thank you. John Love. The applicant, we also have the applicant's representative, Kendra Casper. That person can share the 5 minutes with you, or they could have their separate 1 minute, however you wish. Thank you.
Good afternoon, John Love with Chappelle Properties, representing the project developer. Thank you, first of all, to the planning department and city staff for working with us through this project. We've been working on it for a couple of years, and they've been terrific to work with. And wanted to just express our excitement to bring this project to reality. We've been working with the council office really in multiple iterations for over 10 years on the project. And so we've been, really the current iteration we've been working on for the last couple of years, working with the community, with the council office, and really feel like we've got a terrific project that will provide amenities that the community doesn't currently have. A real true gathering space, very high-end amenities, and in addition to a formal community room, just a place for the community to gather in an environment that that the community doesn't really have now. So we're just excited about being able to bring that to fruition. Our company has been involved in Porter Ranch for over 30 years, and we and our partner consider this project as part of the legacy for the quality, bringing quality to Porter Ranch. So we're just excited and want to thank you for considering the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Kendra Casper.
Kendra Casper, Liner LLP. I represent the developer. I'm just going to waive my time, but I'm just here in case the committee has any questions after everybody has spoken. Thank you.
Thank you. David Balin from the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council.
Good afternoon, Board. David Bain with the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council. The Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council has concerns raised by the community regarding the non-fulfillment of public benefit and preservation of the characteristics associated with Porter Ranch. The community is primarily a low-density residential community with hiking, mountain biking, equestrian trails, and several gated and non-gated communities, as well as some retail establishments, churches, medical, and other offices. Currently, no building exceeds 3 stories or a height of 48 feet, and we are asking that no building shall exceed 3 stories or a height of 48 feet on either side of Rinaldi. Secondly, we'd like the entire project to meet all the Porter Ranch specific plan requirements, such as shade-producing trees at the minimum of 1 tree for every 4 parking spaces. This is a big concern to us because the Porter Ranch Town Center was built without meeting these minimum standards, thus creating a heat island effect. Next, we request immediate identification of the Porter Ranch art funds that should have been distributed and deposited into the Porter Ranch Art Fund Trust Account. As stated by the City Planning Commission hearing, the Arts Council was never formed. At this point, we are requesting the formation of the Porter Ranch Art Council and clarification if the funds were ever deposited into an interest-bearing Porter Ranch Art Trust account. We support the use of electrical vehicles within the community as part of the Transportation Management Organization, that's the TMO, and Shared Ride Transportation System, Section 9F of the specific plan. To date, it's very unclear if the TMO was ever formed as required by the specific plan. The benefits of the Transportation Management Organization to the community includes reduction of traffic, reduced air pollution, and improved mobility for the employees and residents. The community involved and the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council participation, innovation, transportation ideas can be implemented and move us closer to a citywide sustainability goal. We further request that the environmental impact report be updated to include recent traffic studies for all the streets adjacent to the project, as well as include the potential environmental impacts of the Aliso Canyon gas storage. We are requesting that the developer actually have the 2-acre sites dedicated to the city of Los Angeles for a future library and other municipal facilities prior to the issuance of any building permits. The city of Los Angeles and its taxpayers should not lose out on this valuable land. We request that the applicant developer prove the compliance of the state greenhouse gas emissions law AB 32 SB 375 and for the project to include all requirement mitigations achieve compliance with all the above laws. We request continued denial of the double-digit sign. You know, Porter Ranch is not in an entertainment district. You know, the City Planning Commissions denied the digital sign back when we had our last discussions in Van Nuys. We also request that the 4,000 square foot community room be required as part of the project given to the current shared space at the Porter Ranch Community School is not available to the community on weekends. When the school's out or is being used by the school or there's school holidays, we're unable to use the community room. Basically, the community has from 6 to 9, 5 days a week. That's roughly only 15 hours. The community deserves more. Furthermore, it does not conform to the specific plan requirement that it divides the room into 4 separate areas, giving 75 seats in each section. The community greatly benefit from this type of a meeting room. What we now have at the school is the same limited access that anyone can have required by the state law. Additionally, the 10-year contract will expire with no guarantee of the benefit being available in perpetuity if LAUSD or the City of Los Angeles chooses not to renew it. There are several unanswered questions, including who maintains the facility, what are the access hours, will there be a rental fee, what if it's a commercial building when the community room is sold later on? Will we still have the guarantee that the deed restrictions required that the new owner will honor the existing agreements? In conclusion, the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council is requesting that all aspects of the Porter Ranch specific plan and the development agreement be adhered to. The public benefits in the specific plan were negotiated in good faith many years ago between the community, the City of Los Angeles, the developer, through many difficult negotiations. The Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council demands that steps be taken to ensure that all of what was agreed upon to be provided and enforced by the City of Los Angeles for the benefit of the community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. James Allnut, Mal Mitchell, Jane Stanton. 1 minute each.
Hi, I'm James Allnut. I happen to live within 500 feet of the proposed development, and I realize something's going to be developed there. However, nobody has brought up the fact that nobody's projecting the traffic count. This center takes up a half a block starting on the east of Porter Ranch Drive all the way over to Mason. There is adequate land on both sides of the freeway at Mason to put in 4 new on-ramps and off-ramps to mitigate the traffic that's already bad at the corner of Porter Ranch and Rinaldi. Chappelle owns the land on the north side, so 2 of those off-ramps, they already own the land. The other 2 are scraps of land that had been left over since the 70s when they ran the freeway through, and there's no development on those 2 sites. They're probably owned by Caltrans. The city, for whatever new development goes in those 2 places, should require that on-ramps, both directions, be erected at Mason to mitigate the traffic for this development, plus another 2,000 homes are going to be built by Toll Brothers.
Thank you, sir.
North of the development. There is no northerly outlet in that area.
Your
the
time is
traffic
up, sir.
comes in there.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'd like to have the city council respond. Why does the
your time is up.
EIR not say
Sir, your time is up.
anything
Thank you.
about this?
Yeah, thank you.
If Englander doesn't
Sir,
get
your
this
time
passed,
is up.
we
Thank you
need
very much.
to make sure he gets
Thank
thrown
you,
out.
sir. Mal Mitchell, Jane Stanton.
Good afternoon. My name is Mel Mitchell. I'm here talking in support of the Porter Ranch Shopping Center. And this project has been considered for a very long time. I first got associated with it back in 2005 when I was active in the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council. It came again in 2010 in a different version, and in 2015 is the plan we're looking at today. I also am a member of the Porter Ranch Design Review Board, and we reviewed the project in 2016. And consistently, at every meeting, year after year, the community has come out in support of this shopping center, and that support still exists today. This is going to be a good project for Porter Ranch. We need some good news after our gas leak. And we encourage the city to move aggressively and quickly on this matter and with no delays. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Stanton, Dave Hassan.
Hi, I'm Jane Stanton. I'm the Executive Director for the North Valley Family YMCA at Porter Ranch. And I, too, support this project. It's a very good project. Our community needs this. And they have been good neighbors to all of us. We are about 4 or 5 blocks from this site. And the thoughtfulness that's gone into this project, the support of the community. I also serve on the Design Review Board. And we have seen many people talk about this project for many, many years. I support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Hassan. And the last speaker is Eddie Arango.
Dave Hassan. I'd like to just clarify 2 points. The first point is the satisfaction of the meeting room. That has been satisfied by the developer when they did the school agreement. The other portion, the second point that the opposition has mentioned, is the 2 acre. And that's why it's before you. The 2 acres is a trade-off to develop a 4,000 turnkey meeting room within the shopping center at no cost to the city. If there was a dedication of land, it would sit vacant. The city would not have the funds to develop it. The trade-off, which the public, at a public hearing of over 300 stakeholders, were clearly informed of that and totally were in support of this. I'm also a member of the land use, I was a former member of the land use committee of the neighborhood council where it was unanimously approved. Thank you. And as far as the digital sign,
Thank you.
If that makes a good shopping center better,
Thank you.
I'm in favor of it.
Eddie Arango.
Thank you, Chair Member Huizar and members of the committee. My name is Eddie Arango. I am the Senior Land Use Manager for Kaiser Permanente. Just want to start out with last year, Kaiser Permanente's Woodland Hills Medical Center celebrated its 30th anniversary, serving residents of the San Fernando Valley, and currently provides care to more than 178,000 members in that community. Kaiser is very excited for the opportunity to expand our services and our mission to provide high-quality, affordable health care services and improve the health of our members and the communities we serve, namely, of course, our expansion here at Porter Ranch. It's important to note that the proposed Porter Ranch Medical Office building, which we intend to be part of this Chappelle development here, will serve patients and members in the San Fernando Valley and envision to expand this service here with approximately 44 providers, 145 staff members, including doctors, nurses, medical professionals, and staff. And it will include primary care, behavioral health, dermatology, vision, and pharmacy. I can go on the slew of community benefits that Kaiser, as an anchor institution, provides here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Englander.
Thank you, colleagues. I want to spend a little time actually going through some of the questions and concerns about this project. But before I do that, if you guys can imagine, and particularly the people who are here on other items and being very patient, I appreciate that. This community has been very patient, particularly the community of Porter Ranch. And you all have heard what we've been through in the last year with the biggest gas leak in U.S. history, where 20,000 people, 8,000 homes were evacuated for months. So anytime we talk about any kind of project anywhere near Porter Ranch, it's a very sensitive subject for good reason. We also have a lot of stakeholders who are incredibly passionate, and rightfully so, and very emotional about anything that happens there, and rightfully so. And so I appreciate and welcome all that passion. I'm going to address a lot of these issues, but before I do so, I want to say this has been going on, this project, for 12 years. And it's not just a shopping center. To my colleagues, it's a lifestyle center. We've always said we want something that's sort of, we call it Caruso-esque in our neck of the woods. And we wanted something that you would go to not just to shop, but to spend time with your kids, with your family. A place where you would just go to read a book and make memories and do your homework and study outside and develop those long-lasting lifetime memories. That's what we wanted. And we wanted a good tenant mix. We wanted to make sure we had high-end tenants and restaurants and a very nice movie theater and things that would enhance the community. It's a very different type of community than we see throughout Los Angeles, and we wanted to protect, preserve, and enhance it, particularly with what we've been through. But over the last 12 years, there's been a lot of deep discussions, public hearings and vettings and input from all the various stakeholders, and I truly appreciate that because I've never seen something done to that depth. Now, having said that, this started over 20 years ago with the process of a development agreement, really what we call the Bible of a project, a lifelong, the strings and the triggers attached to everything and anything that's done. And unfortunately, 20-plus years ago, fortunately or unfortunately, there wasn't as much land use litigation as we see today. And so because of that, every single word changes a meaning and a definition. There's interpretations that we all know. If you give to 3 different experts, you get 5 different answers. And so because of that, there's been many different reiterations of it. And I'll give you an example. A great example. Somebody had mentioned, one of the speakers, one of the appellants, and I believe in looking at my notes here, it was Jason who said, you know, the joint use agreement was supposed to be signed to get off of and trigger certain and various elements like the community room or things that were promised to us, but it had to be done at groundbreaking. Well, what's interesting then is, so I've taken all of these questions and all these concerns, all the trigger points. There are 18 very strict, carefully crafted mitigation enhancements that need to be checked off as part of the development agreement. And one of them, and a few of them hinged on the school. and it said at the time of groundbreaking. So I asked our city attorney, who I'm going to ask to come up here now in planning department, to answer a lot of these questions that I have on behalf of the community. And looking at that, well, what is groundbreaking? And like Jason, I think he mentioned, it was June was the groundbreaking. Well, there were two groundbreakings, so we come to learn. The two were the school actually didn't do the grading and the breaking of the site. It was a turnkey school designed and built by the developer. So their groundbreaking was different then, and they have to adhere to, specifically legally, groundbreaking as defined by the city, not a public groundbreaking where you just invite what they call a ceremonial groundbreaking that was done by LAUSD, hence the different dates. So in looking at all that, there's a lot of interpretation on these things. So I want to ask, if I can, the planning department and as well as the city attorney to come up. I just have a few questions I want to get into because I want to address all the concerns that were brought up by all the appellants, and then I've got a motion that I'd like to my colleagues to entertain as well. And I want to thank you all. I know you've done a deep dive in this. One of the things in terms of the public benefit compliance matrix out there, which is very difficult to unwind. There were a lot of things that were brought up, not only by the appellants, but the community, and making sure things that were complied with. And I want to make sure those things were addressed and are addressed. The one, and the biggest one, being the 2 acres. Everybody seems to bring up the 2 acres, and for good reason. The 14-acre park, nobody brings up because we already got it. But the 2 acres, if you could address under what provision that is it deemed complete, is it not deemed complete? And we want your interpretation, and I know you've done a lot of work on looking at these things. If you can weigh in on that first.
May with City Planning. In the specific plan under Section Section 9, it says, library and other municipal facilities, the applicant shall provide and dedicate to the City of Los Angeles a 2-acre site for government offices or other municipal buildings and uses, including a public library, or as part of a K-8 school site as provided for in subsection H. This requirement can be satisfied on the K-8 school site if the Los Angeles Unified School District and City Council have entered into a joint use agreement prior to breaking ground on the site. If not, then they would have to be provided elsewhere. And so it's not a requirement to do a 2-acre site. It's to do either a 2-acre site to build those facilities or to use the school site to provide for those facilities. And
Okay.
so based on the council motion.
I appreciate that. I've read the language as well. And it does say, and I know there's some confusion in that it's either or. That they either provide the 2 acres or have the joint use in place. And there was a council motion, I believe, that recognized that as well.
Correct, in 2010.
Okay, that codified that. So according to planning and our city attorney, our legal analysis is that has been deemed complete.
Correct.
Correct, okay. In getting into some of the issues on traffic, particularly as it under our purview, certainly there's AB 32, SB 375, all the other issues and the cases that were cited by the Supreme Court. Overall, in environmental, can you just do a quick overview on addressing some of those issues and as the appellants described?
So in regards to the original EIR, that included a transportation analysis that included mitigation measures for the full entire build out of the specific plan area. And with the subsequent addendums that were done over the years, there were additional analyses that determined that the mitigation measures from the original EIR were sufficient to mitigate any impacts that with the changes to the specific plan. The latest one was in 2006. With the 2016 addendum, the Department of Transportation did review it and the changes to the project, which is essentially just the community room. And they determined that there would be no impacts, especially because the proposed project is a much smaller scale than what was originally approved as part of the specific plan and analyzed as part of the traffic. The original EIR didn't require review with greenhouse gas just because of the year that it was certified. However, the 2016 addendum does analyze compliance with the AB 32 and SB 375. And part of the court case, one of the potential pathways to compliance with those two state bills is with compliance to the local regulations, which the proposed project would have to comply with the Green Building Code at time of permitting. So in that sense, it would be in compliance with the greenhouse gas.
Okay. A couple other of the things I don't think that were talked about. They weren't mentioned by any of the speakers. I wanted to make sure that we mentioned not only the appellant's concerns, but also, and what they voiced here, but also what they wrote. And as part of their summary of appeals, they also talked about solar panels being installed and perhaps wind turbines in a wildlife study. Can you address those and what our requirements are, and are they being met?
The current building code requirement, Green Building Code, requires that buildings be solar ready. The applicants have proposed to provide solar panels on 2 of the buildings. That's above and beyond what the requirements of the code would be. I know that the appellants have requested additional requirements that they would like to see. However, that is with excess of the code, so they would be requiring meeting the code requirements at this time.
Okay. One thing I just wanted to bring up to some of the appellants as well, that I've reviewed all the appeals, and I know it was mentioned verbally about some of the height issues, but those weren't part of the appeals and part of the official record. For whatever reason, I think they just made their way in today. The community impact statements, but they weren't part of the original appeals, and I think those were addressed from that. In terms of some of the other community benefits, those were the ones that were mentioned on appeal. I want to also make sure that the community room that is being proposed is also codified, as was mentioned earlier. And one thing before I ask for the amendments and conditions of approval, I want to point out, some people had brought up the digital sign. Where this came from, and I think it's really important to know the history, wasn't originally from the community. And this was described and discussed at the public hearing that I went to, where over 300 people were there. We went through it in detail, and I asked by a show of hands in the room how many would be okay, not supportive, but be okay of the idea of having one, and why, and I explained why. And I would say 90% of the hands in that room went up. Everybody in the room was in favor of moving forward on this plan, and this was back in, just so you have the date, because we had hundreds of people there, September of 2015. And one of the things we did is we were trying to, the community, my office, and the developer were trying to attract a tenant mix that this community wanted. We didn't want something like what we had across the street. We didn't want just another strip mall. We wanted a high-end tenant mix. And so I went to ICSC, the International Shopping Center, Convention Center, where there's 40,000 people go to this, and had numerous meetings with many high-end retailers and restaurants, Whole Foods, many of the others that we were trying to attract into this center. And one of their big concerns was the demographics and the studies and the traffic volume that we had. We didn't have sufficient traffic that they believed for lunchtime. They had dinner crowds for family, but they didn't believe we had a breakfast or a lunch to support that many restaurants. They didn't think we would have the type of tenant mix and to attract, and it wasn't right directly. You couldn't see it from the freeway. You would drive right by it because the freeway's lowered. It's beyond lower than grade. You wouldn't be able to see it. They had concern about some of those issues. This is what they brought up to me. I shared all this with the community. They wanted 5 digital signs, is what a lot of people told us. That's what makes the difference. Their number was 5. Many people said the same thing. Something like a Citadel. I said there's no way that we would ever go for anything like that. So I brought it back to the community, including the neighborhood council, and everybody supported the idea of, well, if we had one, but it was incredibly limited, limited to what time it actually turns on and off, the illumination, the frequency and the volume in which it actually changes, that there's no on-site, if you will, products that are displayed for sale. It's just the stores. So and there was only one, double-faced one, that the community, and would be masked, wouldn't see from their homes either. That's what they supported in concept, and they did so for those reasons that I explained. And so there was a lot of history and discussion about this as well. I know a lot of people some folks are coming back on this. It's been a long process, sort of Monday morning quarterback or new to the discussion, and I appreciate that too, but there is a lot of history on this. So colleagues, with that, what I'd like to do is I circulated my suggestions in detail, and so that should be before you, including to which on the digital, it actually breaks it out that it's equipped with a sensor. Other devices automatically adjust to the brightness of the display according to changes in ambient lighting to comply with light intensity limitations. So I go into great detail about that and testing it on a regular basis. So all of those things are really broken out in detail, and I think we've asked and answered. And staff, I want to thank you very much, and particularly Planning and City Attorney's Office. It's very complicated to unwind so many different amendments, and particularly over 20 years, and the intent and making sure we were in legal compliance, because I will not give up anything that this community not only deserves, but is entitled to. There's no way that we can do that. And so I appreciate you stepping up and doing and taking this on. So I would ask that we adopt the revisions to the specific plan and conditions of approval as amended. The amendments have been circulated, and that the clarifications and additions to the signage sections pertaining to the new center and the new site, and clarifications to the conditions of approval, which include the memorialization. This is really important. The memorialization of the community plan, more specific conditions on operating, and so those are spelled out as well, because we need an operations plan, who's in charge of it, that we have it in perpetuity. All those things have to be spelled out. So on signage and clarifications to the required EV parking as well, and I would ask for your aye vote in support of that to protect not only this site and this project, but to protect this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Englander. For the city clerk and staff, you have the items before you. So those are what has been proposed for an amendment. So there's been a motion to approve with modifications as proposed by CD 12. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Cedillo. Any other further questions or comments? Seeing none, any objections to the motion? No objections to the motion, so ordered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now turn to item number 4. If you could read that into the record, please, Mr. Mejia.
Item 4, Councilman, this is a report from the Cultural Heritage Commission.
Is your microphone on? Yes.
It relates to the inclusion of Parker Center as a historic cultural monument.
Okay. Thank you. And I know there are some people who are waiting in the hallways. If our Sergeant at Arms could let people know that item 4 is up before us, and if they wish to enter, if we have space. I know there are some people leaving from the previous item. And to our planning department, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon, Council members. Ken Bernstein with the Planning Department and Office of Historic Resources. Wanted to take you through the history of this application for Parker Center. This Historic Cultural Monument application was actually initiated by the Cultural Heritage Commission itself as permitted under the Cultural Heritage Ordinance. And this was actually the second time the Commission initiated the application. It initially recommended approval of this designation in early 2015. However, the Council was unable to act on the designation due to a time limit. This was reinitiated in September 2016 and unanimously was recommended for approval by the Commission in November of 2016. The Cultural Heritage Commission found that Parker Center met 2 of the Cultural Heritage Ordinance criteria for designation. First, that Parker Center is a notable work of a master architect, as one of the most significant designs of architect Welton Beckett, whose other notable projects locally include the Los Angeles Music Center, Bullock's Pasadena, the Cinerama Dome, and the Capitol Records Building. Beckett's design for Parker Center exemplifies his philosophy of total design, integrating architecture, landscape, and artwork. Second, that Parker Center met the cultural heritage criteria for reflecting the social history of our city, for its significance to the history of the LAPD, to the Los Angeles Police Department, and to urban policing nationally. At the time of its construction, Parker Center was the most technologically advanced police station in the country, pioneered the concept of centralizing all police facilities under one roof, and was the headquarters for the LAPD during tumultuous times and changing times for many decades. In addition to the Commission's findings, it is important to note that Parker Center already does have designated historic status. The property was evaluated in 2010 as part of the Metro Regional Connector Project and was formally determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, and thereby, with concurrence from the State Office of Historic Preservation, listed in the California Register of Historical Resources as a contributor to a Civic Center Historic District. Finally, we did want to note that there are two related items pending before the Council in the Entertainment and Facilities Committee. There's the certification of the final environmental impact report for the Los Angeles Street Civic Building Project, which was prepared by the Bureau of Engineering. That is the proposed project to demolish and replace Parker Center with an approximately 750,000 square foot city office building. There is also pending consideration of the Civic Center Master Plan, which has been led by the Office of the CAO, and a plan prepared by the IBI Group, which addresses facilities and proposed land uses throughout the city's portion of the Civic Center. The Entertainment and Facilities Committee met last month, considered both of these items, but continued the matters in committee pending Plum's consideration of the Historic Cultural Monument application. But the final decision on demolition or retention of Parker Center is not before this committee today. What is before the committee today is the narrower question of, does Parker Center meet the criteria for Historic Cultural Monument designation under our Cultural Heritage Ordinance? And again, the Commission's unanimous recommendation is that it does meet two of the criteria. Finally, two of the 5 Cultural Heritage Commissioners, Commission President Richard Barron and Vice President Gail Kennard, are here with us today and would like to request 2 minutes rather than 1 under public comment to have an opportunity to represent the Commission's position on this matter. So thank you.
Sure, thank you. Gail Kennard and Richard Barron. Are you here? Oh, there you are.
Okay. Hello, Councilman. Thank you for the additional time. Okay. I'm Gail Kennard. I'm Vice President of the Cultural Heritage Commission. I voted to save Parker Center. Without question, Parker Center meets multiple criteria for designation, as was noted by Ken Bernstein. But as I wrote in the LA Times last year, this issue, as all of you know, is complicated. I understand the reluctance of some who remember the ugly history of Chief Parker and the LAPD's position against people of color. But I also believe that the demolition of this building will not do anything to change that history, nor will the demolition change the history of our Japanese American neighbors who lost property in the 1950s to make way for this building. So here we are 60 years later, and we are still dealing with the issues of relations between communities of color and the LAPD. The same issues of changing neighborhoods to make way for new buildings. I would argue that saving Parker Center, recognizing its historic significance, adaptively reusing it, is a better use not only of our public dollars, but also of the lessons of the uglier parts of our history. So I would urge that you consider the designation of this property. By the way, it's not only the ugly history, which is so painful for all of us, but as I said, it's very complicated. Not all the history is ugly. Several city councilmen were former LAPD officers, including Bernard Parks, who I believe was a predecessor to one of the councilmen on this panel.
and our great mayor, Tom Bradley, who served with the LAPD for 20 years. So I urge you to vote for designation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Richard Barron. I'm the president of the Cultural Heritage Commission. I'm also an architect with 40 years experience and very well versed with adaptive reuse projects, which I completed many in my office. There are going to be today several Japanese Americans who are going to come testify about Parker Center and about the loss of that block through one of the first CRA takes of property. And I sympathize with their sentiments. But at the same time, the loss of Parker Center, I don't want you to confuse what you're deciding today. Parker Center, you're deciding whether or not it meets the criteria to be a Los Angeles Cultural Monument. My commission and I believe very strongly that this building meets the criteria to be a monument and is a unique building associated with the 50s development within the Civic Center. There are no other buildings, such as Parker Center, that represent that unique history. I believe that there could be a win-win solution. There's a master plan in works. There could be an addition onto the building. The building could create the connection to Little Tokyo that the Little Tokyo community really wants and deserves. The building could be a very positive element within the Civic Center. Aliso Street could be used as a public paseo, and there could be a wonderful solution there that includes Parker Center. Please don't confuse what you're deciding today. Please realize that Parker Center is a unique building and deserves to be recognized as such. What happens in the future remains in the future, and you should only deal with what we're dealing with today, which is the vote of whether or not this building meets the criteria to be a Los Angeles Cultural Monument. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now turn to public comment. Yukio Kawaratani, Steve Nagano, and Cindy Abrams.
I'm a member of the Little Tokyo Community Council and the Historical Society. Little Tokyo opposes historic monument status, and the community urges City Council to construct a civic center that recognizes that Little Tokyo exists. During World War II, Japanese American business owners and residents were forced to leave Little Tokyo and were imprisoned in American concentration camps. Little Tokyo became Bronzeville. After the war, Japanese American businesses and residents returned to reestablish Little Tokyo, but soon the city demolished 1/4 of Little Tokyo and built Parker Center that turned its back end to the community. The City Council must not ignore Little Tokyo interest again and not choose to memorialize a bad building and police chief. Unify the Civic Center and Little Tokyo.
Thank you. Steve Nagano, Cindy Abrams.
Hello, I'm Steve Nagano. I'm a member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society. I'm a board member of the Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council, and I think more importantly, a resident of Little Tokyo. We support the position of the Little Tokyo Community Council, that is the demolition of Parker Center. And as a historical society, we especially given the block historic role in the community, we would like to emphasize the community's involvement in how the new structure not only be inviting to Little Tokyo, but also reflect the history of this block through its art and even a facility to house the historical society. Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy Abrams, John Holland, and Francis Culado.
Good afternoon.
I am a board member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society, and I am here in regards to the different positions that are being taken for Parker Center as a family member of the owner of the Kashu Mainichi, which was a very important English-Japanese language newspaper from the 1930s to the 1980s in Little Tokyo. I strongly urge the City Council to not preserve Parker Center through the Historic Cultural Monument nomination or by choosing a preservation option in the EIR. I'm also affiliated with the Natural History Museum in their citizen science program, and I just want to point out the discussion about trees and how important it is to other communities. Little Tokyo is devoid of any kind of natural species. The most you're going to find down here is like a bug or a bird. We need a community that reflects the vitality of my father's business in the 1930s through the 1980s. We need public spaces, not preservation of this building. Thank you.
Thank you. John Howland.
Good afternoon. I'm John Howland with the Central City Association. Parker Center has been a structural hazard for more than 2 decades, and based on the needs of the city and the desires of the surrounding communities and downtown as a whole, it makes sense to replace it according to the plan set forth in the Civic Center Master Plan. CCA supports the Civic Center Master Plan and believes replacing Parker Center is a crucial and critical first step towards its implementation. We stand with the Little Tokyo community and agree that this building stands as an impediment to a more inclusive vision for this area. Given the high cost and limited return from attempting to restore Parker Center, CCA opposes the historic designation, and we thank you, Mr. Chair, for the hard work you've done to advance the Civic Center Master Plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Francis Culado, Doug Ahira, Ray Fukuda, and Ann Kumamoto.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francis Collado, Executive Director of Visual Communications and Arts Organization on First Street North, just across Parker Center and the Union Center for the Arts building. We understand the argument for the preserving history, but just want you to understand whose history is being preserved. What we want to see stories that have been effaced to come back to life. Know that there is a history in this place before the building was erected, a history of people being displaced, a history of encroachment into the community, and a history of building barriers around us. We strongly urge Plum to not preserve the Parker Center through the Historic Cultural Monument nomination. Instead, we stand with the Little Tokyo community in supporting the demolition of the Parker Center because we foresee a future with pathways that connect us all through a shared civic master plan. We want to walk on bridges that connect us all. Parker Center itself is not a bridge, it's a wall.
Hello, my name is Doug Ihara. I'm a true Angelino, born and raised in Los Angeles, and I've been coming to Little Tokyo since I've been a child. I'm also a second-generation business owner that has had an office in Little Tokyo since the late 1940s, and so I've seen many changes over the years. It's my understanding that among the goals of the Civic Master Plan is not only to provide better ways to consolidate the city's departments and to make better use of city land, but also to make the city center a more connected with the communities that surround it, i.e. Little Tokyo, Bunker Hill Towers, Olvera Street, and some degree Chinatown. So I support this vision to build something that would be a lasting statement to not only our own country, but to also the world, that the Los Angeles Civic Center is a well thought out, integrated, beautifully designed destination where people work, play, and live. So since I don't see the Parker Center as a redesign in this, I support its demolition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi, good afternoon, honorable council members of the Planning and Land Use Committee. My name is Ray Fukuda, and I am a project manager and planner of the Little Tokyo Service Center based here in Little Tokyo in downtown LA. I mainly want to discuss the financial and planning reasons why we are in support of not nominating the Parker Center because we support the EIR Alternative B3. First off, this is based off of the Department of Public Works and Bureau of Engineering Architectural Divisions, Los Angeles Civic Street building study. So we understand that Alternative B3, which is a new construction, would be the most financially responsible decision. It costs $107 million less than Alternative B4, which includes preservation of the Parker Center. That is a significant amount of taxpayers' money. We are also concerned with the fact that Alternative B4 of preservation has a new construction building that goes 6 entire stories above ground with parking alone, and this would basically mean that Little Tokyo will be staring at a large parking structure and not allow connection at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Did you say Alan or did you say Joanne Kumamoto? That's why we're both up here.
I have here on.
Joanne?
No, not Joanne. Doesn't say Joanne.
Okay.
Alan, that was crossed out.
Alan.
Alan was crossed out.
That's the Japanese pronunciation.
Okay.
I have
I was confused too. Okay, let's go with it. Alan Kumamoto, Andy Lowe, Dina Furumoto. Welcome.
Okay, I'm Alan Kumamoto, and what I like to do is tell a personal story because I've been 3 generations of Little Tokyo and what's now called the Arts District. That block was very historic, and the Rafushimpo newspaper was on the corner of First and Los Angeles, and there was a Buddhist temple there. My grandfather had both a photography store, and later when he became a doctor, he had an office there. And so he was a doctor for both the Japanese American and Latino community at the time. And so there's a lot of significance there for our community and what it represents and means. And we would really like to see option B3 in that whole proposal so that we can open up that whole area and return it to Little Tokyo and some of the heritage and culture that needs to be retained. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne Kumamoto.
Thank you. My name is Joanne Kumamoto, and I'm co-chair of the Little Tokyo Bid. I'm here to encourage you to move toward a holistic preservation of the Los Angeles block. In 2001, council member, former then Assembly member Gil Cedillo co-authored SB 307 to preserve the handful of remaining Japan towns in California. As part of that, as a tangible treasure that reflects the history and traditions of our ethnic communities and towns, SB 307 recognized Little Tokyo as a diverse, unconnected assemblage of of physical structures linked together by ethnic, cultural, and historic bonds. I just really would like to recommend that we not go through, not to use the HCM process, but to choose the option B3, where both Little Tokyo and Parker Center can be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Lowe, Dina Furumoto, and Michelle Yamashiro. Welcome.
Hi there, my name is Andy Lowe. I represent East West Players, which is the largest theater, the largest Asian American theater in the nation and the longest running theater of color. We operate in the Union Church, which is right there across the street from the Parker Center. And as we talk about kind of this idea of historic preservation, the question I ask is that history is not just the story that is out there, but it's a story that we choose to tell. And so the question I ask is that, do we want moving forward, as we move into our future, do we want the story and the buildings that we have here in our community to be that of encroachment and of occupation, or do we want something that is open to all of communities that are here and inhabit our city? So that's all I asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Dina Furumoto, and I'll be speaking on behalf of Allison De La Cruz, who's the Director of Performing Arts and Community Engagement at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center. We are asking you to oppose historic cultural monument status for Parker Center at Plum today. We believe that demolition is the only option that will create pathways and link the Civic Center back into Little Tokyo and our future regional connector station, enable retail to make the Civic Center area a living community that stays open past City Hall closing time, provide parking to replace the city lots in Little Tokyo that will eventually be developed over, and allow for a dedicated public art piece that commemorates the erased history of Little Tokyo and its displacement on this block to protect and preserve the future vitality of Little Tokyo. A vote for the preservation of the building is a vote to preserve the displacement, separation, and insult of the Japanese American and Little Tokyo community. Thank you.
Michelle Yamashiro, Sophie Wong, Terry Hara, Miguel Vargas. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I am Michelle Yamashiro, speaking on behalf of the Tunya Canyon Detention Station Coalition. As part of Los Angeles history, we stand in unity with the Little Tokyo position to right this wrong and for a more holistic preservation of the block's history. The Parker Center block should be reintegrated back into the fabric of Little Tokyo. The Civic Center Master Plan seeks to achieve this via pathways connecting City Hall to Little Tokyo and our future regional connector station. The B3 demolition option for Parker Center is the only plan that enables this connectivity, as well as provides retail space that will keep the Civic Center area alive past City Hall closing time. It is the only plan that makes fiscal sense, given the cost to rehab the structurally deficient Parker Center, and the only one that provides parking to replace. Demolishing Parker Center is key to achieving both the city's goals for the Civic Center Master Plan, as well as for the future vitality and preservation of the Little Tokyo community and making the region whole again. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophie Wong, and I'm here as a staff member of a Little Tokyo organization, and I speak on behalf of my colleague, Paul Matsushima. I'm writing on behalf of Kizuna regarding the different proposals for the Parker Center building. As a community organization in Little Tokyo, I strongly urge the City Council to not preserve Parker Center through the historic cultural monument nomination or by choosing a preservation option in the EIR, but instead I stand with the Little Tokyo community in supporting the demolition of Parker Center. Little Tokyo remembers that before Parker Center, the block was a vital and vibrant part of the Little Tokyo neighborhood since the late 1880s. But Parker Center was constructed so as to physically cut Little Tokyo off from City Hall. To preserve the building would be to preserve the separation and this insult. And I know folks before have said that, we're writing history here, but I think that really we have to remember that the past isn't just in the past, right? This building isn't just here and we have to just leave it here. This is a decision that you can make to reconnect our community to itself. Thank you.
Terry Hara, Miguel Vargas.
Good afternoon, council members. I've worked with the city for 35 years with the LAPD, and I've worked in the building for many of those years. The fissures and the fire escape stairwells were enormous. The hallway floors were not level. I remember one side of the building was higher than the other side, shifting every 6 months, requiring maintenance crews to shimmy the doors so that we can close the doors properly. I felt unsafe in the building. The building was tagged yellow, but should have been tagged red. Rick Caruso, president of the police commission, was also concerned about the structure integrity and required the city to take immediate action to move out of the building immediately. Aside from everything that's been said about the Japanese American community, as a Japanese American and the parents that were interned as well and were displaced in the night prior to the 1940s, I say demolish the building today so that we can begin to have an area open for the public to use. Thank you.
Thank you. Miguel Vargas, not here. Evelyn Yoshimura, Justin Saka, Stephanie Nitahara.
Hello, everybody. Today I'm reading this on behalf of Jonathan Takeo Tanaka. He's a businessman, and he is also the grandson of people who established a business, two businesses on the block that, in question. This is his writing. I'm writing this regarding different proposals for the Parker Center building. Grandson of a business owner and great-grandson of the first pastor of the Japanese Union Church, located right across the street from the Parker Center facility. I strongly urge the city not to preserve Parker Center through the Historic Cultural Monument nomination or by choosing preservation option in the EIR. But instead, I stand with the Little Tokyo community in supporting the demolition of that building. My grandfather, Chikashi Tanaka, established Tanaka Photo Mart and another business on the block. On December 14th, he was taken away to Missoula, Montana, and he came back and he rebuilt in Little Tokyo. 10 years later, he had to watch people again being displaced on that block, across the street from him, down the street from
Thank
him,
you.
and he was very upset. The preservation of this block's history, Parker Center block, should be reintegrated back into the fabric of Little Tokyo. The Civic Center Master Plan seeks to achieve this via
Thank you.
pathways.
Your time is up.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I was going to ignore that.
I'm trying to be
but-
consistent with everyone.
Okay.
I just try to be
Although
consistent.
they did get 2 minutes, a couple people,
Okay.
but okay, we'll let that go.
Hi, my name's Justin Saka, reading on behalf of Irene Simonian, a third-generation business and property owner of Bunkaro store in Little Tokyo. A line must be drawn as to what buildings are worth saving and what are not. The Parker Center building is not one of them. The Parker Center building served as a backdrop for movies and TV shows, served as LAPD headquarters during significant moments in history, and it was considered state-of-the-art in 1955, but these reasons do not qualify it to be preserved forever. As I understand it, the cost for retrofitting this building to survive future earthquakes and removing asbestos and other detritus of 60 years is staggering, especially when its practical use after all the renovations is questionable. I have heard from those who have worked inside this building, and it leaked constantly, and the windows made it extremely energy inefficient. As much as one would like to romanticize it as being mid-century and modern, it is basically a glass block with little aesthetic or architectural interest. There's a temptation to save as many older buildings as one can from the wrecking ball as a reaction to all the great buildings this city has lost over the years. However, I personally look forward to seeing a vibrant, practical, forward-looking, and hopefully more attractive building in its place as a positive addition to the residents, visitors, and businesses of neighboring Little Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Nitahara, and I'm representing the Japanese American Citizens League Pacific Southwest District. First, I'd like to show you some pictures of historic Little Tokyo. And also, I'd like to express my support for Little Tokyo and the demolition of the Parker Center. Little Tokyo is the community most impacted by this decision to preserve or demolish the Parker Center, yet those fighting for the preservation of the Parker Center did not reach out to Little Tokyo to ask what we wanted. Had they asked, they would have known that we were in support of the demolition and believe in community self-determination regarding how we tell our story and what happens to the community. The Parker Center remains a symbol of previous injustices, including the removal of Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans for the Civic Center expansion in the 1950s. For this reason, we strongly urge the Plum Committee to reject the Historic Cultural Monument status nomination that the Parker Center is seeking and instead support demolition. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen Endo, Ron Fong, Kanji Sahara.
Good afternoon. Ellen Endo, Little Tokyo Business Association. First of all, let me be clear. This is not about retribution or territory or nostalgia. This is about respecting the wishes of the descendants of whose parents and grandparents built this area into a cultural stronghold. Before the Civic Center began its expansion in the 1950s, Little Tokyo was triple the size it is today. The area embraced not only Japanese immigrants, but also Mexican, Chinese, Italian, and Jewish immigrants. It is where these families lived, worshiped, went to school, and made a living. Welton Beckett designed more than 30 public buildings throughout his career. Many warrant recognition and preservation, but Parker Center is not one of them. Simply labeling a building iconic does not make it so. Please spare us the analogies between Parker Center's preservation and the World War II experience of Japanese Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Ron Fong. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Islander Small Business Program and a Little Tokyo representative on the Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council. I'm here to deliver a letter from HCNC in opposition of the nomination of the Parker Center as a cultural historic monument, and in fact supporting the demolition of the Parker Center and supporting option B3 of the LA Civic Center Master Development Plan. The CA's office should be applauded for how they've reached out to the Little Tokyo community and worked with us on looking at options for that site. This stands in stark contrast to the Cultural Heritage Commission, which has yet to engage HCNC on this matter and has not really engaged the Little Tokyo community at all. If they had, maybe they'd have realized that the street next to Parker Center is ISO, not Aliso, named after the highest ranking Japanese American in the U.S. military during World War II and California's first judge of Japanese American descent. Thank you.
Kanji Sahara, Phil Shikakuni, James Okazaki, Ann Burrows.
Hello, my name is Kanji Sahara. Until the 1950s, Los Angeles had a restrictive housing covenant. The Japanese people could not live where they wanted to. My family lived in a neighborhood called Uptown, which is now Koreatown. This was one place where Japanese were allowed to live. The dividing line went through the middle of the block on which we lived. The part closest to Olympic Boulevard was 100% Japanese. The part away from Olympic Boulevard was 100% non-Japanese. Uptown was a Japanese ghetto. Little Tokyo was also a Japanese ghetto. This is where the Japanese were allowed to have shops, businesses, and housing units. In 1955, the city of Los Angeles took away land from Little Tokyo. The city used eminent domain to take away the land. The city said they needed the land for, quote, public purposes to build Parker Center. Now that the public purpose has gone away, the Japanese people want their land back. We want back the Japanese ghetto land.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is James Okazaki. I think many of you know me as a former city employee of 34 years. I've been retired now for 10 years, but very involved with the Little Tokyo community, which I love. I want to say that Little Tokyo is city's neighbor. And frankly, I think we've been not treating our neighbor fairly and equitably. And I would like to see a legacy set by this council, including the Plum members here, to sort of a legacy of restoring Little Tokyo as much as possible back to the community where the eminent domain powers of City Hall took the businesses and the livelihood of the people that were there. So I hope you reconsider not giving it a historical, cultural significance status and demolishing that building. The history of it is not pleasant for the community, nor is it for the city. And those history could be kept in a museum at the new police building. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Phil here? Phil Shijakuni? No? Okay, Ann Burrows, Mitch Maki, and Kristen Fukushima.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Burrows, and I'm the interim president and CEO of the Japanese American National Museum. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the museum in support for the demolition of Parker Center. And we say this for several reasons. The museum is one of the anchor institutions in Little Tokyo. It was built on the site where in 1942 Japanese Americans were forced to board buses that would take them to detention centers en route to concentration camps. Like other Japanese American communities up and down the West Coast, the Little Tokyo community was forcibly removed and families were dispossessed and separated. Eminent domain laws that allowed for the city to take over ownership of the land to build Parker Center effected a second dispossession and disruption to the Little Tokyo community. The Little Tokyo community was disregarded in both instances. The city now has the opportunity to do the right thing, to listen to the community, and to right the wrongs of history that saw the erasing of homes, businesses, and livelihoods. The Japanese American Museum sits at the end of this pathway that will be created, and our future as a sustainable and viable cultural historic institution is tied to an enlivened and vibrant community. We therefore respectfully ask that Parker Center not be nominated and that it not be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Mitchell Maki, and I'm the president of Go for Broke National Education Center, which is a nonprofit located on First and Central in the historic Nishi-Hongwanji Buddhist Temple. As an organization in Little Tokyo, we strongly urge the City Council to demolish Parker Center. The land that Parker Center sits on was once a vibrant part of Little Tokyo, and since its creation, Parker Center has served as a physical barrier between Little Tokyo and City Hall. A newly designed building would open the pathways and the links to City Hall and to the Civic Center and to Little Tokyo. Finally, a simple cost comparison will reveal that you can build a much more modern, efficient building for much less than preserving a building that has questionable historic worth. Please demolish the building.
Okay. Kristen Fukushima, Dean Matsubayashi, Adrian Scott Fine, Chris Komai.
Great. Hi, folks. My name is Kristen Fukushima, and I'm the Managing Director of the Little Tokyo Community Council. First, can I just get a raise of hands of who's here from the Little Tokyo community? That's great. So as you can see, Little Tokyo feels really strongly about this issue. We are the most immediately impacted community, and that's why I think it's so important in matters like this for council members such as yourself to listen to those most impacted, to the community who's immediately adjacent, so adjacent that this land used to belong to Little Tokyo. I also want to say this isn't a matter of preservationists versus everyone else. Little Tokyo, we are all about preservation. We are a 133-year-old community, the second oldest neighborhood in all of LA, one of 3 remaining historic Japantowns in the entire country. Our work is inherently preservationist because we are about preserving our historic community. However, we do not see preservation as merely about buildings. We see it about people, about communities, about those who are most impacted. As the folks most impacted, we see this building as a symbol of land being taken from us, of oppression among many communities of color. And there are many ways to tell that history. It does not have to be done through a building. And how would people who just walk by the building know this history? How do you put that nuance into it? Is the Conservancy launching an education program? If there's no way to tell the history properly, it makes more sense to just completely get rid of it, put everyone back on the same page, and have a new way of talking about history, and let us tell our story for ourselves, and not let other people say what is best for our community. So we support no on preservation, yes on demolition, and I have copies of all the letters that have been submitted so far, as
Great.
well as more historic photos.
Thank you. You could give those to the clerk.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Dean Matsubayashi, and I'm the executive director of Little Tokyo Service Center, a 37-year-old social service and community development organization committed to preserving and protecting our neighborhood, Little Tokyo. I'm here today, along with many others from the community, to express our strong opposition to designating Parker Center a historic cultural monument. As many speakers have already noted, the Parker Center building is part of a long history of encroachment and displacement in Little Tokyo. For some, they feel that Parker Center should be preserved for this reason, and that the building is historically significant because it tells the story of a great injustice in LA and shows how far we have come as a city. To those people, let me just say, we do not need to preserve the Parker Center building to remind us of the mass displacement facing Little Tokyo, because we have plenty other reminders in the community, such as the First Street North and Mangrove blocks directly adjacent to Parker Center, along with the surge in market rate development that has displaced over 12 long-standing businesses in our community. By not designating Parker Center a historic cultural monument and instead demolishing the building as the Little Tokyo community supports, the city has an opportunity to rectify its mistakes and reconnect the Civic Center back to Little Tokyo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Adrian Scott Fine with the Los Angeles Conservancy. As a citywide issue, I start by saying not all historic places engender strong positive feelings or associations, and that's clear today. And we all know that history is not always pretty. Yet significance and historic cultural monuments can encompass both positive and negative elements in multiple layers of history and stories. And perhaps no place illustrates that better than Parker Center. Places like Parker Center teach us valuable lessons and empower us to face and own our history, both the good and the bad parts. We need to tell the full story of Los Angeles and not arbitrarily pick and choose only the parts of history we prefer. The fact that Parker Center brings out so many strong feelings only underscores its important role in Los Angeles' history and how it helps us remember and understand our past while also allowing us to move forward. Issues of demolition, cost, the EIR, reuse, the proposed Civic Center master plan are not before Plum today. The issue today is about whether Parker Center meets the criteria for HCM designation. And on that point alone, it does. So we strongly urge your support. Our 6,500 members of the Conservancy urge your support for this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Komai, Meredith Pat, Jeff Chop.
Sorry.
Crop.
Hi, my name is Chris Coleman. I'm the board chair for the Little Tokyo Community Council. You've heard the position our community has expressed to you. It is unbelievable to me that people are asking for a designation of historical significance for a building while ignoring our history, right? They're saying, don't listen to us. They just said, don't listen to us. This is ridiculous. As you know, Councilman, the Rafu Shimpo was on that block. My grandfather, that's where he started that business. It was demolished afterwards. There's no trace of it. Ask any of these people over here if they knew anything about our history when you talked about Parker Center before this issue came up and we came out and spoke. It is incredibly disrespectful to my family and my community that they come here and they say, don't listen to this part of it. Everything that we said, don't listen to. No, if this is about history, then you have to hear this and you have to make this decision. Little Tokyo is owed a huge debt by the city of Los Angeles, and it needs to consider what's best for Little Tokyo here. And if that means demolishing the Parker Center building, then let's do that.
Jeff and Meredith, either one? Either one. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jeff Chop. I live here in Little Tokyo, and I'm a member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society. The city of Los Angeles would do the world a great favor by tearing down Parker Center. I think as we're going through this most intolerant period, certainly in my life, we have to ask, who was William Parker? During the Parker era, which ran from 1950 to 1966, almost anybody who lived in Los Angeles during that period remembers what it was like to have an encounter with the LAPD. Certainly, if you were a person of color, during the Parker years, when you were stopped, you were reminded which side of town you were in. Parker had an idea of a very segregated Los Angeles. blacks and Latinos should not go too far west of Western Avenue or above the 10 freeway after dark. If you were not white in the white areas, it would be common to be disrespected by the LAPD. If you were a person of color, you could be stopped for doing nothing except walking or driving down a part of town you didn't belong. You would be stopped by a white LAPD officer on a so-called routine traffic stop because you were on the wrong side of town. Parker enforced racial status quo in Los Angeles' unspoken Jim Crow laws, which held into the early 1970s. Parker used the police department to enforce the racial restrictive covenants that prohibited blacks and others from renting and buying in certain areas long after the courts ruled them illegal in 1948. It's time to move on. Tearing down Parker Center would be a blessing. Parker's legacy, getting caught on the wrong side of the town. Yes, this figure of speech came from Parker. Time to move into the future. LAPD has come a long ways, moving away from its dark past. Parker's police department's years is Los Angeles history that should be forgotten. Time to take down a symbol of a sorry past. Thank you.
Thank you. Meredith, Patty Berman, Eric Harris, and Leslie Young.
Hi, my name is Meredith Pat. As someone who works every day in Little Tokyo at a vibrant and vital nonprofits organization, East West Players, I care deeply about the future of this block where our theater is located. We look at Parker Center every day. I advocate for not designating the Parker Center as a historical monument. It does not meet the designation of preserving a cultural, being preserved on a cultural basis because it only preserves one culture. It erases and does not acknowledge and completely ignores the rest of the history of that block and the building. They also say that it's because it's well-known architect. Well, he's got monuments all over Los Angeles, and they are much more aesthetically pleasing. And that should, since he has enshrined in other places, the Parker Center need not be designated historical. Thank you.
Thank you. Patty Berman, Eric Harris, and Leslie Young.
Good afternoon, almost good evening. My name is Patty Berman. I am the president of the Downtown Los Angeles Neighborhood Council, here speaking for myself today. First of all, I have been honored and have been given so much by being allowed to serve the downtown community with all of the amazing, beautiful buildings that need to be preserved. Ones of history, ones of grandeur, and ones of beauty. Parker Center is not one of them. There is no reason to not listen to my neighbors in Little Tokyo. I stand here for them. There is no reason to make Parker Center a monument to a very bad period of time. What we need is to listen to the community, to the stakeholders in the area, and say, yes, we will do for you what you need. Thank you.
Eric Harris.
Hello. All the other speakers have addressed the issues I wanted to bring up, so instead I just wanted to say thank you all for listening to us.
Thank you. Leslie Young.
Good afternoon, members of the City Council. My name is Leslie Young. I am daughter of the late artist Joseph Young, who created the mural inside of Parker Center that was built in 1955, called the Theme Mural of Los Angeles. It is a 10-foot by 36-foot, 6-ton mosaic mural that was actually installed in situ, meaning right there at the site. One of the things that has not been considered in the environmental impact report, that is swaying decisions possibly towards tearing down Parker Center, is the unknown cost of actually removing this mural because it is supposed to be saved. So that is something that nobody is really discussing, and absolutely with no disrespect to our Japanese community and to their history and the emotions that people here feel about the situation, two wrongs don't make a right. Tearing down Parker Center will not change the history. I am strongly in favor of the cultural preservation of this building, not only for its architectural history, but for all of the popular reasons that this building became famous, popular culture on television, and I do believe that the council needs to consider the unknown costs of moving that mural in addition to the cost of demolition. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment on this item. And if we could have both the Planning Department and the Bureau of Engineering come back up to the podium, please. The Bureau here as well. Okay. Thank you. And first, to lead off some questions, we are here to determine the nomination and whether or not to acknowledge this as a monument. And some of the criteria that's presented to do that is first and foremost the architecture of the building itself. It was noted that Welton Beckett is a well-known architect that designed many other buildings in Los Angeles, including UCLA's Poly Pavilion, the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, Mark Taper Forum, Amundsen Theater, Theme Restaurant at LAX, Capitol Records, Beverly Hilton, and the UCLA Medical Center. To our planning department, in light of those other buildings that he has built, or they have built, where does the Parker Center stand in relation to those other buildings and its significance?
Yes, again, Ken Bernstein with Office of Historic Resources. The criteria on the Cultural Heritage Ordinance are to find whether this is a notable work of a master architect. On numerous occasions in the past, we have designated the work of Welton Beckett, including some of the buildings you mentioned, such as Capitol Records, Cinerama Dome. So he has met that bar of being considered a master architect in the past. I think the question is whether this is a notable work of that master architect. This is a building, while it is spare and a modernist building, mid-century modern building, it has been found through previous assessments to be an excellent example of its style, international style. As I mentioned in my staff report, the building has been previously designated, that it has been found to be a historic resource already, and indeed the environmental impact report prepared by the Bureau of Engineering for the replacement project acknowledged the significance of the building. So we do believe it meets the Cultural Heritage Ordinance criteria of being a notable work of Welton Beckett.
Well, the way it's been described in the reports is that it's a masterpiece specimen of mid-century architecture. What does that mean?
Again, that it is an excellent example of a particular architectural style. This is often known as the international
style itself.
The style itself. And again, we do not have many examples in Los Angeles of what's called the international style as applied to a civic structure. While again, often these mid-century modern buildings are not terribly lovable, as was noted, and I think as you've heard today, under the Cultural Heritage Ordinance criteria, again, we do believe that bar has been met, that this is a notable work of this particular architect.
Okay. And there's been some discussion about partial preservation. Is that possible? Or has that been explored?
Maybe I'll leave that to Bureau of Engineering.
So, Council Members, Deborah Weintraub, Chief Deputy City Engineer for the Bureau of Engineering. I'm an architect by training. You asked us approximately a year ago to go back and look at partial preservation, and we did. And the option before that we came back with was the most effective way to look at preservation, and that really preserved the whole structure. When we looked at trying to preserve a piece of it, it became too complicated and too costly. In the EIR, though, we acknowledge that there are pieces of it that should be preserved. The mosaic that was mentioned earlier and the sculpture out front would both be preserved and replaced, relocated in a new building.
Okay. So when you examine the partial preservation option, which is something this council asked the departments to analyze, it became too complicated to figure out what historical aspects do you preserve. But the mural, the theme mural of Los Angeles by Joseph Young and the family group, bronze sculpture by Bernard Rosenthal, those both were noted as worthy of preservation either way, correct? Whether we preserve it or not, those are worthy of preservation.
That is correct.
Yeah. How about the jail? Was that either historically worthy of preservation, and structurally, where does it stand?
I don't know that I can speak to its structural condition. That was not a factor in it being considered eligible for historic designation, and I think indeed some of the preservation alternatives that have been examined by the Bureau of Engineering would adaptively reuse the rest of Parker Center, but would result in the demolition of the jail, and is not considered a primary or significant architectural feature of the building.
Okay. Now, a lot of the testimony that we heard today was based upon the historical context of Parker Center and not just the building itself, what occurred at the building, but also the longer historical context of what was there before. Was that taken into account in determining whether or not to nominate this as a monument?
No, it's not. Again, and I think these are very legitimate points that have been raised by the community. I don't mean to diminish that in any way, but the task under our cultural heritage ordinance is really to evaluate what is on the ground today or what has been put forward as a nomination. So that's these are very important points that have been raised, and they are appropriate to consider as the council debates whether or not to preserve Parker Center, whether to certify the environmental impact report or proceed with another alternative. The question that's before you today is strictly whether what is on the ground today and the nomination that's before you meets the criteria of the cultural heritage ordinance.
Well, and certainly for myself and the numerous nominations that I've seen before this committee or council, we take into account whether any particular nomination meets that criteria, but we also take into account other factors, historical context, cost. There's other variables that go into place in determining whether or not when we balance those out, whether or not a particular property is worthy of nomination. But in this case, it does seem rather disturbing that historical context wasn't taken into account, but that's what this public process is for, to raise those issues.
Well, that's right. And again, I think you will consistently hear from our department that those other factors are not to be considered in the question of whether or not to designate. Once a property gets designated as a historic cultural monument, you can then face choices as to how that will be dealt with. It is possible still to demolish historic cultural monuments, and indeed we have an environmental impact report that is pending before the council. If it is certified, it would clear the way to do just that. So I think you will consistently hear from our department that it is important to remain focused on the question at hand in dealing with designation, looking at just the eligibility criteria. Part two later could be based on all those other factors, financial, community, other policy considerations, what is the appropriate way to treat a designated historic cultural monument if it is designated?
Okay, and looking at those other factors, if the building is preserved, how will it interface with Little Tokyo? Has that been discussed in the master plan? Or master planning discussions that have occurred?
The specific design of the interior and the preservation of the building has not happened. We've looked at the building at a very conceptual level in order to develop costs. So how it might address and face the Little Tokyo community has not really been vetted at this point, if we were to preserve it.
And if the building is demolished, one of the criteria that would determine whether or not to nominate is occurrences or events of historical significance that are worthy of preserving a place. So if we were to demolish it, any plans to remember what happened there?
So we have, in the preliminary designs, the conceptual designs for a new building, we've looked at ground floor public uses that could include a small museum that would talk about the history of the site, the history of the police department, the history of the Little Tokyo community. We've also looked at ground floor uses to bring life back to that area, 24-hour life, such as a restaurant, a child care center, a gymnasium. But the new building would allow us to make an alley, a strong connection, a walking path between the Civic Center and the Little Tokyo community.
Okay, so looking at remembering the occurrences that have happened there in the past, if we should decide to do that in the new, if it's demolished, there are many opportunities to do that in the new sites that are created, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the presentation. It's been very enlightening. I think I'm inclined to not support the designation at this time, but I am curious. There were repeated reference to meeting 2 of the criteria. What are the 5 criteria that are considered, and could you
Certainly.
expand on that a little bit?
Yes, there are really 4 criteria for designation as a historic cultural monument. The 2 that it meets are association with a master architect, a notable work of a master architect for its association with Welton Beckett, as well as its association with the social history of our city, the social history of the community for its role in the history of the LA Police Department. The criteria that we did not believe it met were it being an excellent example of an architectural style. Again, there are many international style buildings. We did not find that it met that high bar of being a particularly excellent example, while it is a notable work of the master architect. So we did not find that it met that particular criterion. And then in addition, did not find that it was associated with historic events. Again, there were historic events associated with Parker Center, but we did not find it met that bar on that. So those 4 criteria, 2 of which we found were met.
And there was some reference to the California designation, California Registry designation.
Parker Center is already, regardless of what happens with the city historic cultural monument application, Parker Center already does have historic status. It is a property that is included in the California Register of Historical Resources. That was as a result of a metro undertaking for the regional connector. There is something called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act that requires when there's federal money involved, historic resources be evaluated, and there was a formal concurrence in that finding by the State Office of Historic Preservation as part of a civic center historic district that was created through the regional connector evaluation. So it is a building that already does have historic status. As with historic cultural monument status, that does not mean that the building cannot be demolished.
And then finally, the building is 8 stories tall and 4 stories underground, or what's the configuration of the property?
Mahmoud Karimzadeh, I'm the principal architect for Bureau of Engineering. The building has 1-story basement and is 8 stories tall.
I'm sorry, 1-story basement?
1-story basement and is 8 stories tall.
And where's the jail?
The jail is north-south direction, which is towards the end east portion of the Parker Center.
On the first floor?
On the first floor, but the jail itself is 3-story. 1 at the basement level and then 2 levels above that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Thank you. First, I want to thank all those that have come out to share their rich history and culture, and staff as well. It always amazed me. It's always incredible what you've got to navigate within the parameters of what's before you, and the history that you bring and the knowledge of the process is rather remarkable. What we're talking about is cultural and historical significance. And what does that mean as it pertains to this building? I, for one, can tell you, not only as a police officer, but growing up and seeing that building in so many movies and shows, and I remember walking through those halls and meeting with various police chiefs and staff over the years, and to me it's a building of cultural and historical significance for many different reasons, but that doesn't mean that it should be preserved and standing. I think one of the best lines I heard earlier, quite frankly, and I didn't get your name. It was one of the young men that came up earlier and said it's, you know, history and preservation needs to be a bridge to the future. But this is not a bridge, it's a wall. I think somebody said that. I think that was a great line. I see this, the history, you know, it's not before us, and I know it's just a designation that's before us, but it also paves the way into what the future decisions are going to be and the immediate decisions are going to be. So it's very significant. I see James over there nodding his head. And Terry and so many others that came to testify, a lot of history. Just, I think Terry and James Okazaki need to be cultural historical monuments in the city. But I would like to designate this as a future site to be demolished. Actually, it would be my designation. I think I didn't realize that the same architect had done so many other projects in LA, and I'm glad because there's many of those that need to be protected and preserved that are phenomenal and beautiful. And just because one architect touches different projects doesn't mean everything they touch need to be always protected and preserved. And we've got to always talk about that. We had an issue, and I was looking, Councilman Price and I were sitting here staring at the ceiling together talking about this room moments ago and how beautiful this room is. For those of you that haven't looked up, there's a lot of history in this room. But it's beautiful as well, and it didn't have history on the site before this building was built. There's a lot of differences, and for those who are dead set and no matter what, we've got to protect this building just because. You know, I remind you of, and the ones that say, I think, I'll just leave you this last thought, partial preservation. I have got a solution for partial preservation as well. But to remind you that this is the room we're in right now where the scene from A Few Good Men said, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. That was filmed in this room, for those of you that don't know. And some people won't want to handle the truth on this, that this building, it's time to tear down that wall. But, and that does remind me on the partial preservation, the Berlin Wall, when it was torn down, I think it was 1987 or so, when it was torn down, they did preserve it. In fact, I know several people that have a little tiny piece of it on their desk. And so maybe there are ways to preserve little bits and pieces of that building. So thank you so much.
Mr. Cedillo? Mr. Cedillo?
Mr. Chair, I'm very happy with the way the conversation is going. I respect and appreciate the work and what people have brought to us of what they think the question is and what the narrow question is. But frankly, there's other questions, right, that were raised by people in the audience, the question of whose history, how far back in history do we go for designation. We've learned that there's other criteria for preserving buildings, and then there's instances where there's buildings like the sports arena. I'm missing it every time I go up and down the freeway. That's iconic. It was historic. It was, I believe, merited preservation. I believe it had that mid-century in millions of movies. I mean, a lot of things. For some reason, it's not there, which tells us something that we don't preserve all buildings. You told us that while it wasn't an excellent example of this architect's work. And that's a good thing because we have others which deserve more attention. Both the chair and I grew up in Bora Heights, and I have an extremely fond memory of my life growing up in Bora Heights. Part of that is my life with the Japanese American community, my friendship with Brian Miyakawa and his family, my coach, Ken Fujinaga, in B football, my friends that I grew up with, Wade and Reed, who moved over to Sawtown, the west side of town. The woman who was the cleaners around the corner, Fumiko, who was a dear, dear friend for years. History is important, and the question before us is whose history? And I think we've heard from the community. I think it's clear. And so the question, while it may be arguable, that it's only a question of does it meet the criteria. That's a question of process. And the question of process is always a question of what process do you utilize to get a substantive result? And in this instance, if the substantive result that we want is a richer and fuller understanding of our history, if the substantive result is a just result, if that's what we're concerned about, then there's no point in pursuing this process of making this designation. Because we're for demolition. And if that's the result that we're looking for, if the demolition is the result that puts us in the just and substantive conclusion, that recognizes not just a history that begins in 1955, but the totality of history, that then there's no value and there's no point in pursuing this process and coming out with a designation for which then we would vote against, because we'd say, but other factors considering it doesn't, we don't value it sufficiently enough to preserve it. And so I'm against both against the process question, the designation, and I am for the question of the demolition, with full deference to the Japanese American community and the totality of the history of the area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. I first want to thank everyone who is here in attendance today, and the overfilled rooms shows how important this item is, not only to downtown LA, Little Tokyo, but to the city. And the last time we heard this item was in 2015. At that time, council lost jurisdiction and was unable to act. But I did request at that time that we revisit an EIR that had been prepared for the site in order to fully exhaust all possibilities related to preservation or expansion. I also directed that work begin on a civic center master plan, one which we did not have, and we were talking about how haphazardly we were going to build things around City Hall, but really didn't know what direction we were going in. The plan has been completed and presented to Entertainment and Facilities Committee, where it is still under consideration. And I want to acknowledge all of the stakeholders in the room. I believe this committee recognizes why this is such an important conversation for many people. The Parker Center is a notable space for multiple reasons. It is also a chapter of a larger story, as we have heard today. But we have a natural tendency toward a revisionist history. In Los Angeles in particular, it can seem like we are so quick to destroy what limited history we have built up over the last 75 or 100 years. But there's always more to the story. The story of Parker Center has often glossed over the fact that it was not the first structure on this plot of land. In fact, as was mentioned today, this block was once the center of daily life and business activity for the Japanese American community. The block was privately owned until the late 1940s. It was occupied by homes and businesses, people walking around, milling around, doing their everyday chores. It was an original part of the Little Tokyo community. The original headquarters of the Ralph Shimpo newspaper was on that site, and I have fond memories of me growing up in Boyle Heights, as Mr. Cedillo mentioned, with our Japanese American neighbors, where I delivered that newspaper to. The residents and shop owners were forcibly removed during World War II, as they were sent off to internment camps in what is one of our most shameful moments in American history, a humiliating and degrading experience to people who were American citizens. Not long after they returned from the camps and had begun slowly and painstakingly rebuilding their community, the city of Los Angeles acquired the property by eminent domain. The entire block of homes and businesses were completely razed to make room for expansion of city facilities. And eminent domain at that time did not have a lot of due process requirements that we have today. Parker Center not only erased an important part of Little Tokyo's history, in its design, it turned its back on what remained of Little Tokyo. And in practical terms, it does little to facilitate activity and accessibility to the spaces and resources at City Hall. It serves as a blockade. The building does embody an important story about the history of policing in Los Angeles. As Historic Resources has noted, its construction was seen as a symbolic move for the LAPD. It created an ambitious, modern container for an agency that wanted to modernize and become more efficient. The building may have helped the department modernize, but it was at a cost. The subsequent decades at the LAPD provided us with case studies of police efficiency and proactiveness, but also in some instances, abuse of power, cruelty, and racism. This building epitomizes the Parker area. It also epitomizes an unfortunate, myopic relationship to its stakeholders, including but not limited to the longtime members of the Little Tokyo community. Architecturally, we can recognize that it was built by a master architect. I understand this. I am a preservationist, and I'm very proud to say that. I believe buildings hold important stories. They are repositories of public memory. But many would say it is not an especially unusual example of Welton Beckett's work. It is not reflective of the designer's broader contribution to LA, which we have well preserved in other buildings like the Capitol Records Building and the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. We also have more significant and noble specimens of mid-century institutional architecture. To call this building a masterpiece specimen of mid-century architecture and to retain its landmark status with a Parker name is to further the revisionist history that dismisses the injustices to many communities, including Little Tokyo. I believe we can do justice to these histories and better tell the story of the building and its relationship to policing without spending millions of public dollars just to freeze the building in time. We can get to a partial preservation of a different but extremely significant kind if we are mindful. Not the partial preservation as outlined in the EARR, but there are portions of the building that can be preserved that are meaningful and can tell the story of the history and occurrences that happened at that building. Our precious resources can better be spent on a careful, thoughtful preservation of certain elements, as I mentioned, such as the murals, public art, and other architectural features, without needing to rehabilitate obsolete offices and jails that just serve no purpose. Our communities, our workers, and our city deserve truly modern, efficient, useful, and livable upgrades. However, we must make every effort to ensure that the theme mural of Los Angeles by Joseph Young and the Family Group bronze sculpture by Bernard J. Rosenthal are integrated into the design of any new buildings that go on the site. Additionally, we've heard from staff, and I know it's not before us, the preservation option would require the city to absorb exorbitant costs way and above preserving this building. The Civic Center master plan that I called for also was tasked with analyzing financial strategies to make the build-out feasible. I don't see that the preservation path is consistent with our fiscal realities, even though we know that's not before us, but it's one element of many that we take in consideration when nominating a building. So with that, I'd open to see if there are any further questions or comments or motions to be made.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your comments. And I just want to thank everybody who came down to testify today and the staff that put together the process that we've gone through. It warms the heart to hear about your grandfather, your uncle who set up a business and helped build what we now know and love as Los Angeles. Like any story, there are parts of it that are uncomfortable. There are parts of it that we don't like. A strong city and a strong community and a strong people don't cover up their history. They don't try to change their history, but they also say a lot about who we want to be going forward when they decide what to lift up. And so, like across the state of California, we've changed the names of schools that were named Robert E. Lee. Across the South, we've taken down the Confederate flag. We didn't have to say anything bad about the seamstress or the designer or the design of the flag. We said that what it represents should not stand and represent our culture going forward. And I think the idea that the name William Parker, for the folks that I represent, would be attached to anything called cultural or heritage is an abomination. And so I'm proud today to stand with Little Tokyo and the East Side and the Valley and all the city and move that we deny the application for this designation.
Motion has been made to deny the nomination. It's been a second and a triple second by Mr. Cedillo and Mr. Englander. Any other further questions or comments?
Just one last comment. I know there's probably going to be some cheers of victory on this vote, but I think we really should cheer the staff too, because for really they do so much work and have done such a great job, and we really appreciate it. They don't bring in an opinion; they just bring in the process. So, and I truly appreciate it. We all do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, if no objections, so ordered. Thank you very much. Item number 5.
Item 5, Councilman, this is...
1 second. Yeah. We have, for those in the audience, we have one more, we have our agenda to continue with, and it's running late. If you could quietly exit the room and hold your conversations to outside. I know it's going to be difficult, but we have more to cover here, so we would appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, item number 5, if you could read that into the record, please.
Sure. Item 5 is a report from the Cultural Heritage Commission relative to declining the inclusion of the Bob and Dolores Hope Estate as a historic cultural monument.
Thank you. Staff?
Okay. Back again for another one. This is the historic cultural monument application for the... Yeah.
1 second. Thank you. Let's, if we could exit quietly, please. We still have business to conduct here, and the voices really carry in this room. 1 second. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. Again, Ken Bernstein with the Office of Historic Resources. This is the historic cultural monument application for the Bob and Dolores Hope Estate in Toluca Lake. As with the Parker Center nomination, this is coming to you on a somewhat unusual path. In this case, the nomination was initiated by council motion, introduced by Council Member David Rue in September, and approved for initiation by the full council. That motion directed the Office of Historic Resources to prepare the nomination for this property, and our staff did conduct the research on the history of the property and prepare the nomination that's before you today. The home, originally constructed in 1939, was designed by noted local Hollywood architect Robert Finkelhor in the French Revival style with Tudor Revival influences for Bob Hope and his wife Dolores. There were a series of remodels and additions through the 1950s and 60s, some of which were designed by noted architect John Elgin Wolfe. Office of Historic Resources staff prepared the nomination and recommended approval of the designation as potentially meeting one of the historic cultural monument criteria for its association with a historic personage, Bob Hope, an internationally iconic figure in film, comedy, radio, and television, and a particularly important figure within the Toluca Lake community where his longtime co-star Bing Crosby also lived. However, the Cultural Heritage Commission on November 17th, after hearing public testimony on the nomination, including testimony from the Hope family and a representative of the Family Foundation, voted 4-0 to recommend denial of the designation. The Commission found that the property does not have architectural significance due to its many alterations and additions over the years, and the Commission noted that there may be better or more appropriate ways to honor Bob Hope's legacy in Los Angeles. It therefore voted to recommend to the Council that the property did not meet any of the historic cultural monument criteria, and this is the recommendation our department is conveying to you today. And finally, just a procedural note, for most historic cultural monument applications, if there is a vote of denial from the Cultural Heritage Commission, the process stops there and you don't see those nominations in Plum and Council. Because this was initiated by the City Council, it automatically comes back to the Council, and instead of requiring a majority vote or 8 votes at the City Council, a supermajority or 10 votes is required from the City Council to approve designation. And Commission President Richard Barron is also still here to further convey the Commission's position on the matter.
Great, thank you. Before we do that, we do have Julia Duncan from Council District 4 who wishes to speak, and then we will go to Richard Barron, the Commissioner, and we have with us former Councilwoman Rosalind Wyman who will also speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Councilmember Rue initiated consideration of the Bob Hope estate in September of last year. Bob Hope resided in at the Toluca Lake estate for over 60 years, and it was his primary home throughout his prolific career that spans nearly 80 years. The planning recommendation report recommended to the Cultural Heritage Commission that the property be declared an HCM. Planning staff told the commission that staffers recommended the designation because the Hope home met a, quote, high bar for designating celebrity homes as landmarks. Quote, this is truly an iconic historic personage who is not just any figure in Los Angeles, and the home has been associated with Hope for over 6 decades. Our office agreed that the estate, due to its association with Bob Hope, was worthy of designation based on the criteria for designation, which includes association with people or in important events in our history. The property is interwoven in both the cultural and social history of our nation due to the prolific career of Bob Hope and his philanthropic work. The Cultural Heritage Commission, however, denied the designation based on possible devaluation of the property. Councilmember Rue's intention is to fully support the historic designation of the home of Bob and Dolores Hope. There is no interest in designating the outlying structures on the property. The Hope property is historically important to the Toluca Lake community, and the Bob Hope estate, and Bob Hope himself is significant to not only Los Angeles, the United States, but also internationally. Councilmember Rue has maintained his position since the Cultural Heritage Commission decision and recommends that only the original 2-acre parcel, there was a map that should have been distributed that indicates those 2 original acres, that encompasses the main dwelling and is integral to the designation in association with Bob Hope, be declared a historical cultural monument. Additionally, the designation should be limited to the exterior of the main home, so excluding the subsequent 3 acres that were acquired down the road. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Richard Barron.
Hi, good evening. When you think of Bob Hope, there's all kinds of imagery that comes to mind. He was a very iconic entertainer in the city of Los Angeles in Southern California. As a commissioner on the Historic Cultural Heritage Preservation Commission, I've been asked when we turned down the Bob Hope residence, how could you turn that down? Well, Bob's daughter, Linda, approached us at the commission and had a very lengthy discussion about what her father wanted on his deathbed. And he has a living legacy that helps veterans in California. And he wanted the property to be sold and be utilized, the money to be utilized in the nonprofit. That struck a chord with me personally and what did with the other commissioners. I hope tonight that you will give Linda, Bob's daughter, as much time as she needs to tell her story. It's very compelling, and I think you should hear it. The house itself, Bob's wife was a wannabe architect. And I say wannabe because she really wasn't. And there's several architects on the commission, and when we walk through it, we say, well, here's a really good example of why you need an architect. She did additions onto it while he was on overseas doing his entertainment shows for the armed forces. And he even said when he comes back, he needs a new floor, needs a new map to figure out where the bedroom is. So the building, the original building, is not really worthy of being a monument. The only thing that's really worthy of this site being a monument is the fact that Bob Hope slept there. And Bob Hope lived there for many, many years. And he was an iconic person. One of the things that Linda will tell you is she'll give you a list of all the other memorials that have Bob Hope's name. There's no way that Bob Hope is going to be forgotten in Southern California. He's going to outlive everyone in this room. So it was with all of that that we felt that we should buy into the living legacy idea, and that any money brought forth by this property should go and become part of Bob Hope and Dolores Hope living legacy. as a preservationist, this was a hard thing for me to swallow, but I realized that I thought it was the best solution. And I hope you will feel the same way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Rosalind Wyman, former council member for the City of Los Angeles, welcome.
Thank you, members of the council. I left here 52 years ago, and I haven't been back except 4 times. One, to be honored myself, and the other time to honor councilmen or for civic reasons. And so I must say, I was going to say thank you for the memories, but having sit here today, I'm not so sure. And I think when I left, you were talking about the Porter Ranch, and I could tell you, if I had time, some incredible stories about Chief Parker that I would love to share with you. They're most interesting, and in fact, I think you would get quite a bang out of one about a pool I had in the city hall after I came in, a baseball pool, and the chief had a file on us all. And he called me, my first year, called me and he said, gambling in City Hall. And I said, Chief, did you call to buy a ticket? And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, if you bust me, I will be the most popular person in Los Angeles, so go ahead. Anyway, that's one story. But I'm here because I'm a friend of the families. I've never been down here for any reason except this. And it seems to me one of the reasons I'm here, I was here when this ordinance came into effect. 1958, we talked about it. In 1962, it finally became an ordinance. And I must say that was quicker than Grand Park, which I waited 50 years for, but now we've got it. We don't move too quickly sometime in civic projects. But I think I know what happened here. I'm an old councilman, and when they wanted to do the garage, fix it up a little bit so they could sell it, help sell it, the notice went out to everybody in the district, and I'm sure all the neighbors thought, oh my goodness, what's happening to our homes, et cetera, et cetera. And a good councilman listens. But I felt that this, I'm going to say something that I hope I would never say if Bob and Dolores were still here. And I'm hoping upstairs as I say this, Bob and Dolores don't listen. This doesn't qualify for anything that this home does. It doesn't meet any of the qualifications. It's a beautiful home, but it's not a Neutra home, and it's not a Paul Williams home. It's not a Gary home. It doesn't meet any of this criteria. And do you know who will be the big loser if this doesn't, if this recommendation of the commission doesn't pass? It's the charitable side of the Hope Legacy and the Hope Foundation. I don't think any of you can walk through LAX and not hear about the Bob Hope USO building. The Bob Hope Legacy and the Bob Hope Foundation is the best representative of a charity in America. Their money is spent well, and the Hopes wanted this to be anything that they left should go to the foundation so it can be used for charity. And all of you know that the minute the designation goes on as a historic piece of property, it loses a lot of value. And it seems to me in this case, as I said, I don't see how this could happen. And I just wanted, as a citizen, knowing the history and being down here today, I wanted to thank all of you for sitting this late. You really had it, and boy, could I talk about the the police building. Whew, I remember when it went up, I was here, and I knew Wilton Beckett, and I don't ever recall him saying this was the most cherished building of my life. And so I hope that you will do what I'm here to ask you to take that the committee, you uphold what the committee has recommendation on the Cultural Affairs Commission and not to deem the Hope home historic. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I wish I had more time. I could have a lot of fun and tell you about a lot of history that you would all enjoy, but thanks for the memories anyway. Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service as a councilwoman and all your civic activity. Okay, now we will hear from the property owners and representatives. First is Charuni Patibanda. Good question. I know what you're going to ask.
Before we get started, could I just ask how much time for the property owner's presentation we would have?
Yes, we have 5 minutes for applicants and appellants in entitlement cases. For owners of properties who are being nominated, we haven't had any rules, but I would assume there's no dead fast rule on that, but we would give 5 minutes and keep consistent with the...
Could I suggest that if we had 10 minutes, we probably wouldn't use it all, but 5 minutes cuts it close. So we've been very careful to time it, and I think it's going to come in around 7.5, 8 minutes.
Sure, 8 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the Plum Committee. My name is Charuni Petibanda. I'm here with Tim McCosker from Glazer Weil on behalf of the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation and Linda Hope. We're here today to ask you to uphold the Cultural Heritage Commission's decision to deny any designation on this site. After Linda Hope and the foundation learned about the motion introduced by Councilmember Ryu, they were surprised and dismayed, but they did cooperate fully with the city and the department and staff. After a full site visit, neither the planning staff nor the commission found the property had any architectural significance, not on the house and not on any other part of the property. In addition, the commission could not and did not make any findings necessary to make any other kind of designation. As Commissioner Malofsky stated, I have a hard time designating something that was never seen, never part of the public, or relevant in that way. As Linda will explain, the proceeds of the sale of the property are to go to the foundation to help those in need. The foundation is a federally registered 501c3 entity and is overseen by the California Attorney General. The Attorney General is responsible for protecting charitable assets and the public. As a charitable entity, the foundation is obligated to protect and retain the value of all assets, especially prior to sale. They are even encouraged to find multiple bidders when trying to sell a property. That is why the foundation opposes any designation on the site and urges you to uphold the commission's decision. I'm now going to turn it over to Linda, who will tell you her personal experience.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And I was going to say good afternoon, but now good evening, and thank you for your patience. I'm Linda Hope, the daughter of Bob and Dolores Hope, and CEO and chair of the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation. I'm here today to ask you to uphold the decision made by the Cultural Heritage Committee to deny any designation of my parents' home. I've devoted my life to my family and spent many years caring for my parents, especially in their old age, and I'm disappointed by the city's attempt to take away from our foundation. My parents carefully planned every aspect of their estate and ways in which their legacy would live on. Designation of this property as an historical monument is not part of that plan. Overturning the Commission's decision to deny would contradict my father's wishes, and I know he'd be disappointed if we could not sell this site for full value in order to fund our foundation, or further fund our foundation. There are already several monuments throughout the city and the county in my parents' honor, including Bob and Dolores Hope Square in Toluca Lake near their home, Bob Hope Square at Hollywood and Vine, dedicated on my dad's 100th birthday, Bob Hope Patriotic Hall in downtown Los Angeles, Bob Hope USO at LAX, Bob Hope Way at Universal Studios, and 4 stars on Hollywood Walk of Fame. Clearly, their legacy is well protected by Los Angeles. My dad spent his career helping people and cared deeply for the betterment of our society. He and my mother explicitly wanted to have living legacies, and to that end, they instructed that the proceeds of the sale of their properties go to the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation to continue the work of those causes that they held dear. They always considered themselves blessed and were concerned for those less fortunate. Our foundation is directly involved with providing food, clothing, and shelter to those in need living in Southern California, particularly in the Los Angeles area, and also to help provide and support for those who serve to protect our nation. An historic designation of a home that's a hodgepodge of renovations and not architecturally significant arbitrarily reduces the value of the property and deprives our foundation of its benefits. A designation is contrary to the express wishes of what my mother and dad wanted as their legacy. Our family is appreciative of the city's efforts to preserve the legacy of my father, but so much has already been done in LA to honor his memory. Preservation of this site that was not seen by the general public was not part of my parents' estate plan, and a designation by you today would totally contradict their last will and testament. Preservation of this one house will deny millions of dollars of aid to help our homeless and our veterans, the very people my parents wanted to be their legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Shopsis or Tim McCosker, either. Do you have a preference? Okay.
Tim McCosker, Glazer Weil, on behalf of the Hope Foundation. Thank you very much. There's a few uncontroverted facts here. One is that there is no historic significance in the home whatsoever. Staff report says that. No one disagrees that there is no historic significance in the structure itself. The other thing that we won't controvert or contradict is that Bob Hope was an extremely famous person. Bob and Dolores, famous folks. They raised a family on this property behind a very large fence and thick hedges. They raised it in privacy. Folks didn't visit this home. Folks didn't come onto this property. That's not part of the historic fabric of this city, the fact that Bob Hope existed, lived in the city of Los Angeles. In fact, as you heard from Linda, the family very carefully established a living legacy, and that's the foundation. In your last hearing, you just looked behind the historic significance of Parker Center and said the deeper history was the community, the choices of the community and the Japanese community and the Asian community that grew up in that area. Well, here the deeper history is what Bob and Dolores chose for their own family. And what you've heard from Linda, the best source, is what they chose is that this property, the beneficial owner of this property, would be the foundation. What is the work of the foundation? The work of the foundation is food and clothing and shelter for veterans. It's help for the indigent. Another uncontroverted fact is that the designation of property, which we're not saying you can't do, but the designation of property is the exercise of a police power. This is not simply approving or disapproving a project. It's the exercise of a police power. You change the value of the property when you exercise that power. And here, you're being asked by staff, not by the commission saw through this, but you're being asked by the staff who is on a mission to designate this property, even though there are no facts, there are no findings, there are no circumstances where you can designate this property. That amounts to a taking of property without compensation. Can you designate? Can you take property? Can you do it without compensation? Yes, you can. If you have the findings, if you have the facts. You do not have them here. And when I say that's illegal, I mean that's unconstitutional. And the beauty of the Constitution is that it applies to big facts. They just argued this afternoon up in San Francisco over the travel ban. That's a constitutional argument, a separation of power. What is the authority of the local government? And we all hope and pray that comes out right. Well, guess what? It's the same Constitution. It applies at the local level. You all who have stayed here get the opportunity to practice constitutional law. You get to decide whether or not the facts and the circumstances allow you to designate this property, even though you've been told by your staff there is no historic significance in the architecture itself, and you've been told by the commission that there is no justification for a designation. If this is about trying to reduce the opportunity in the future for developing the property, not only is that an improper purpose, but it's a lie. Because what you already have on this property is a zoning designation. That zoning designation is RE11. You can ask your city attorney what that means. You are well protected. If any of you have heard in private that this is going to become 40 homes or 50 homes or something, can't happen under the zoning code. And that is a lie. Please reject this designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Shapsis, still wish to speak?
Thank you, Councilman, members of the committee. Just want to read from Miranda Hope, granddaughter of Bob and Dolores Hope, who writes, while it is true that Bob Hope's contribution to the culture of Los Angeles was great, it was not his wishes nor the wishes of his wife, Dolores, that the property be designated as such. To the contrary, it was their express wishes that the proceeds from the sale of their home go directly to the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation, whose primary mission is to feed, clothe, and shelter the poor, with priority to those living in Southern California. I request that you honor Bob Hope by allowing the foundation to fulfill his wishes. He entrusted us to sell the property for a premium price and give proceeds to those in need in Los Angeles through the foundation and he and my grandmother established. It is my belief that making Bob Hope's former home a historic monument will quite literally take resources from Los Angeles' poor. Meanwhile, with the house in its current state, a historic designation would not serve to honor Bob Hope or our family. And that was his granddaughter, Miranda Hope, who also serves on the board of the foundation.
Thank you. Bonnie Viti, Renee Weitzer, Jean Picker Fistenberg.
Hello. I am the property owner 2 houses over from the Bob Hope estate. And I came here originally to speak out against not making it a historic monument because of all of the history associated with it and because of my concern that it would otherwise become subdivided and many houses would go on the property, forever losing the opportunity to preserve its legacy. But after what I have heard about the intention to use the money toward charitable means to support war veterans, I cannot speak against this decision. Our family has a foundation whose purpose is to aid those who are in need. And if this is indeed the intention for the sale of the home, whatever they want to do with it, I feel that I must support this. I think that that is a greater legacy than preserving the house itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Renee Weitzer, speaking as a regular citizen. I was a staff member for Councilman John Ferraro for 14 years, representing the Toluca Lake community. I also worked for Tom LaBonge for 15 years, representing the Toluca Lake community. Toluca Lake is known for the Bob Hope House. Bob Hope, Dolores and Bob Hope home is Toluca Lake, period. The staff report from the planning department was an excellent report, mainly citing cultural reasons for the preservation of this home. They did recommend and support the preservation of this home. Council members, I personally truly believe that Toluca Lake does deserve this home to be preserved. Other areas have famous homes preserved. I believe Toluca Lake should have this home preserved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jean Picker Fritzenberg, Craig Strong, and Marcelo Vavala.
Good evening. My name is Jean Picker Furstenberg.
I was president of the American Film Institute for 28 years, and so I know something about film heritage and film icons. Bob Hope is an American hero. He devoted his career to making us laugh. He devoted his life to supporting America, America's soldiers, American troops, and American veterans. He planned how to use his success to America's benefit. He gave his papers to the Library of Congress. I was recently there and saw how excited all the librarians are to have this incredible legacy. He planned the rest of his legacy to be continuing the support of veterans, of veterans and needy people. We should respect Mr. and Mrs. Hope's wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg Strong and Marcelo Vavala.
Hi, I'm Craig Strong. I've lived in Toluca Lake now for 15 years. I'm also the real estate agent that's representing the estate over the last 2 years, and the home was listed for 2 years prior to that. Trust me, if there was people that appreciated the architecture of this home, it definitely would have sold by now. I think the people that are seeing the house are seeing the same thing that the Cultural Heritage Commission is seeing, and that's a home that has been added onto, and it just keeps going, and it's chopped up, and it just doesn't work for the way people live today. And I just feel at this point, after the motion was passed to start the study on this designation, you've halted the process, and now people don't know what to do. They don't come see the home because it's hard to put a value on something that we don't know. I do think we need to uphold the recommendation of the Cultural Heritage Commission and reject the designation. If you, I just have to say one last thing, because if you do devalue, you will devalue the property by designating this home, even if it's a portion of it, all of it, anything, and it's not fair to the Hopes, it's not fair to the foundation, and it's just something that we just need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker on this item.
Good afternoon, council members. Marcella Vavala with the Los Angeles Conservancy. The Conservancy is in strong support of the council-initiated nomination to designate the Bob and Dolores Hope Estate. The property is being nominated not for its architecture, but for its cultural significance. As the longtime home of Bob and Dolores Hope, the intact estate is unmatched in Los Angeles for its 6-decade history with a single couple associated with the Hollywood entertainment industry. And Bob Hope was one of America's most iconic entertainers of the 20th century, who commissioned this house in 1939, put Toluca Lake on the map as a high-end residential enclave, and actively shaped the estate's design and expansion. Landmark designation will not restrict the sale of the house. It will not restrict its continued use as a private residence. Landmark designation will, however, protect this irreplaceable part of LA and San Fernando Valley history. We strongly urge the members of the Plum Committee to recommend designation of this property as a historic cultural monument. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Staff here again, please. As originally proposed in the nomination, was it proposed for the whole property to be designated or partially designated?
Yes, again, Ken Bernstein, Office of Historic Resources. The original council motion proposed the designation of the entirety of the property, which is about 5 acres.
5 acres,
The suggestion now from Council District 4 staff is to limit the scope of that designation to approximately 2 of the 5 acres, and just the exterior of the main house, excluding the interior.
And the representative of the owners of the property mentioned that the bifurcation could present some legal issues for us in the taking. Without disclosing any type of legal representation in case there is litigation, have you seen similar cases like this? Is it accurate or not? I mean, is it a taking or not?
I'll let the city attorney weigh in on this, but again, we do not believe it is a taking represents the denial of all economically viable use of the property. With our historic cultural monument properties, even with designation, they can be sold, often are sold at premiums beyond what undesignated properties are sold for, and they can remain in productive residential use. It is within the power of the council and for this committee to recommend a change in the scope of the designation that is permissible, that the committee may recommend designating only a portion of the property.
Okay. Yes, City Attorney?
Terry Kaufman, Messiah City Attorney's Office. I don't think the designation of a monument, that mere fact, effectuates a taking. There's nothing to prevent demolition of a monument. You go through a process.
Okay.
But I'm not aware of any case that holds that. So I think you need to look at the definition of a monument in the Cultural Heritage Ordinance and then make your decision according to that.
Okay. Thank you. And are there any other further questions or comments from colleagues? No. Well, I'll move that we move this to council with a no recommendation. There's additional information that I need before me before I would, I'd like to see. I read the report today and was provided some new information today. And so, at least for myself, I want to get additional information before I make a final decision. And we could still move it to council with a no recommendation and have the council vote at that time. Is there a second for that? It's been seconded by Mr. Harris-Dawson. So any objections to moving it forward without any recommendation? Okay, thank you. So we'll, so ordered. When is this scheduled to be in council? When is that? Oh, we don't have a time yet for council yet? No, okay. It hasn't been scheduled. Okay, I thought there was, there's no time. Yes, go ahead.
It's going to be scheduled for the 21st. There is a time limit on this.
Oh, there is a time limit, 21st. Okay. So this is scheduled for the 21st in council. It has been scheduled in council. Okay. February 21st, this will be in council with no recommendation to it. Thank you. Next item, please.
You have item 2 or item 8, Councilman?
We're going to move to item number 8.
8, okay.
If you could read that into the record, please.
Item 8, Councilman, this involves 3 appeals as it relates to the approval of the Brentwood School Education Master Plan and associated new buildings. The project is in CD 11.
Okay, if I could ask the representative from CD 11 to come up first, please. We have a quorum issue that we may be facing this committee. We may lose quorum. We have predetermined obligations by some members of this committee, and the issue before us is, does this have I just wanted to make sure that any decision we make, do we have a time designation for this item? Number 8, yes. Is there a time designation for this?
Yes, the last day to act for council is March 8th.
March 8th, the last day, March 8th. So we have some time. We will lose quorum. We went over our time today. I'm trying to figure out here what's the best way to go about this. We could have a presentation, and then if we ask the public, give each side a certain amount of time. But I don't know how to split the cards, maybe, you know, if we split the cards and pro and con.
That would be fine with us, and I'm sure the applicant's side, who has many speakers here today, would be willing to cede a lot of their time to make sure that we can hear this item.
Okay. We are going to give 5 minutes to each side, and people come up and present themselves. I'm going to try to get through as many cards as possible. We want to hear this item today. We don't want to punt it, but if we could go straight into the comments now and go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Ezra Gale, for Councilman Mike Bonin. Good evening, Plum Committee members. Good evening, Plum Committee members. This conditional use permit is great news for any and everyone who cares about reducing traffic on Sunset Boulevard near I-405. Thanks to the hard work of Brentwood community members and the Brentwood School, one of the largest institutions on this incredibly congested corridor, has just agreed to reduce traffic generated by its East Campus by a whopping and unprecedented 40%. When Brentwood School applied for the conditional use permit before you today, Councilman Bonin reminded the school of the central promise made to the Brentwood community, that he would not support any project along the Sunset Corridor unless it reduces traffic on Sunset Boulevard. This standard that he applies is called the Sunset Standard, and it is the lens through which Council District 11 views every project on Sunset, because Councilman Bonin is determined to do what folks keep telling him is impossible, making traffic better on the corridor. To their credit, Brentwood School accepted this challenge, agreed to meet the Sunset Standard, and worked hard with neighbors and Council District 11 to develop a traffic management plan to make this happen. This plan, detailed in the conditions of approval that were uploaded to the Council file last week and are provided in packets for you today, include the following key provisions. When the conditional use permit takes effect, the school will reduce its traffic by 12.5% from today's standards. At full enrollment, traffic will decrease by 35%. Shortly thereafter, Brentwood School will implement a 40% traffic reduction. The plan also includes a strong busing and carpooling system, the shifting of major events outside of peak hours, maintaining a strict average vehicle ridership system that counts all peoples and all cars, a hard cap on the number of major events, and codification of an important program whereby Brentwood School supports a busing program for nearby Paul Revere Charter Middle School. Importantly, this traffic management plan will be enforced with daily traffic counts, submitted to and verified by an independent third-party monitor and certified by LADOT to ensure that Brentwood School is meeting its obligations to the Brentwood community. These traffic reduction numbers are not merely significant, they are groundbreaking, unprecedented, and they represent a dramatic shift in how we can and should look at new projects along traffic-congested arteries. This agreement may represent the single largest traffic reduction by any existing institution in the city of Los Angeles. It is a sign of leadership on the part of Brentwood School and a sign of great progress for our neighborhood and traffic reduction along the Sunset Corridor. This is all happening despite the fact that Brentwood School is under no legal obligation to reduce traffic below the traffic currently generated today. This agreement is the result of neighbors coming together to craft a system that Brentwood School could not only live with, but aggressively enforce. And the agreement does just that. It is a strong, robust, and precedent-setting system. Councilman Bonin asked you to join with him in supporting this conditional use permit as a tremendous win for the Brentwood community. Thank you.
We have Lauren Q. One of the appellants. And then Sophia Wright and David Wright. Welcome.
My name is Lauren Cole. I'm the transportation rep to the Brentwood Community Council, which is an umbrella group for all 14 homeowners groups in Brentwood. And I'm also the chair of a subcommittee that's been negotiating with the school and the council office on this project for over a year. The city planning decision in November did mandate that the school reduces traffic by 40%, which would put it in line with other institutions on Sunset and meet the Sunset Standard. But subsequent to the city planning ruling, this new amended set of conditions that the school and the council office have submitted no longer meet this requirement. The new conditions introduce a number of loopholes and ambiguities into the CPC conditions, which give the school a lot of ways to circumvent the 40%. You should have a summary somewhere which we submitted, which illustrates exactly what changes were made. The Brentwood Community Council submitted a letter to talk about the main change, which was that the 40% used to have a fixed end date. It was tied to permitted enrollment, and that was what the CPC ruled. The new conditions say that the 40% doesn't have to be reached until the school actually enrolls 960 students, which is its maximum enrollment, and ties it to actual enrollment, which means that the school could reduce one fewer student and never actually meet the 40% requirement that the city is expecting and that the neighborhood's expecting. The school would only have to meet a 12.5% initial reduction. So we are asking that this be changed back. Some of the other changes so the BCC letter, which was submitted on Friday, asks for a fixed date to be put back in on when the 40% requirement needs to be met. My colleagues and I in the subcommittee, though, wanted to point out some other changes that have been made. One is that the CPC required that AVRs be measured. That would go into effect when the CPC is approved. That has also been tied to this 960 enrollment number, so we're asking that that be changed back and that there be a date certain by which the AVRs actually have to be submitted and have to be that the school has to be in compliance. Without those AVR requirements, we have no guarantee that the school could actually increase traffic in the afternoon, which is a real problem time on Sunset. There were also new credits given that would allow the school to offset its own requirements by busing or helping provide buses for other students in the area, but there's no requirement that there's no compliance to make sure that those students actually take the bus and that they actually take the bus both to and from school. There's a lot of students now at Brentwood School that take buses to school and not home. So we asked that if those credits are given, that they're tightened up to make sure that they actually are offsetting traffic and that are meeting the requirements. There was also the daily trip cap, and this is important. The CPC wrote it that the number of cars that they have to meet has to be met every day. But the language has changed it so that it's now an average, which is a big difference. So the compliance now says that the school doesn't have to meet the trip requirement every day. It only needs to meet over all of the days are averaged over a semester, and it only needs to meet the average. So that's a really big change that guts the heart. All of these changes essentially gut the CPC agreement. So we're asking that the agreement be changed back, either to go back to the CPC determination letter or that these changes be incorporated, because there's no reason to make any of these changes if the school plans to comply with the CPC decision and actually meet the requirements. The only thing that these do is introduce loopholes that give the school's future administrations an out. This is an agreement that's going to live on for many decades, even when the current administration is gone. So we want to make sure as the neighbors and the neighborhood that the school, the future generations of the school actually have to submit to the requirements. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. David Wright and Sophia Wright, did you file the same appeal together, or is it separate?
No, I'm David Wright. I'm speaking on behalf of the Sunset Coalition, and Sophia will speak on behalf of us as individual residents.
Okay, so Sophia is also listed as so who will take the 5 minutes then? Because we have, you will, and then
I'll
1 minute.
speak on the appeal.
Okay, all right.
If I may.
Thank you.
The Sunset Coalition is concerned with traffic on Sunset between the 405 freeway and Pacific Palisades. Our appeal has some objections to the construction activity itself, but most of that, 80% or more, we don't object to. For example, and the primary example is on the small West Campus, which is the lower school. They plan and have been approved to build a 54-foot tall structure. So, I would challenge that there's any grammar school in the city that's been allowed to build a 54-foot structure, and this is in a low-density residential neighborhood. It's been many years since the Brentwood School has come before the city for a discretionary approval. In the meantime, traffic related to the school that impacts Sunset has built up without significant limitations, such as those put in place 18 months ago by your committee and the City Council for the Archer School for Girls, which is located right between the two campuses of Brentwood. The various expansions now proposed have caused great concerns by Westside residents and others who use Sunset Boulevard. And let me say that Of the 13 or more organizations represented by Ms. Cole, and we support all of her statements, and the 5 organizations represented by us, none have been in favor of the project in its present form. None of us, very few of these organizations have seen the detailed changes that CD11 proposed to the thoughtful and very detailed specific mitigation measures proposed by the Planning Commission. And so there's a little bit of a process problem here. But in any event, the CPC specifically considered the conditions imposed on the Archer School and developed thoughtful and detailed conditions in its determination letter, which reflected its agreement with many of the concerns of the community. Many members of the community and several organizations submitted comments, of course, to the commission. It's unclear whether CD11 reviewed all of the testimony and submissions by the public, but its proposal essentially incorporates a much earlier proposal by Brentwood School itself and ignores virtually all public comments and interim negotiations, as well as the CPC conditions. It waters them down very substantially, as Ms. Cole stated. The Sunset Coalition respectfully submits that Plum and the City Council should adopt the CPC determination letter rather than the CD11 proposal, and we recommend only a few changes from the determination letter. They're discussed in the appeal, and I won't repeat them here. I will mention, well, I did mention the 54-foot building. This is a complex matter, and we ask that you take it under submission because of these 2 conflicting, very detailed proposals rather than deciding today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so before I go to Sophia Wright, we'll go to the applicant appellant, Dale Goldsmith.
I'd like Mike Riera, the head of school, to speak first, please.
Sure.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. It's going to be difficult. I know you want us to be brief. We want to get to the point. We've been at this for 9 years, though.
So repeat your name,
Mike Riera, the head of school. I think there's a few things important to understand about Brentwood. One is that we have been operating as a school continuously since 1930. First is the Urban Military Academy, and then in 1972 when the Brentwood School took over. We are also operating on the exact same landscaping footprint that we have today. We are not expanding our footprint in terms of real estate at all. Why do we want to have this educational master plan? A couple of things to understand about education. When all of us went to school, the key subjects were English, math, history, science, foreign language, social studies. Those are still major important subjects, but in a contemporary education for great students, it's also important to have an expanded curriculum. Courses like social entrepreneurship, robotics, coding, Center for Innovative Leadership, film, are all things that were part of our curriculum now, our growing curriculum. This plan will also allow us to expand enrollment. Very important for us, considering one of our core values is diversity. This will open up many spots in the 6th grade and the 9th grade, which will come primarily from the public schools across Los Angeles. Another thing to know about us, one of the council members said, it's about the process. Brentwood School could not believe that anymore. We have been in process with our neighbors for 9 years to come up with a covenant. In 1992, we started a covenant with the residential neighbors of Brentwood School, the 100 homes closest to the school, and with the Brentwood Homeowners Association. A 3-way covenant in 1992 that served us well for 20 years. In 2007, when we started this plan, we went back to those organizations and renegotiated a 30-year covenant to march side by side with the CUP that we're having. I'm proud to say it took 7 years, but we have their support. You'll see their letters of support in there. They are on our side, the closest neighbors to us. I think the other piece that I want to touch on is Councilman Bonin and his Sunset Standard. I'll be honest, when he told me that Sunset Standard, I blanched. The idea of increasing enrollment and reducing traffic is very counterintuitive. Yet he persisted, and we persisted and thought creatively, because like anything, when you structure something, you've got to get creative and go outside the box. We've been way outside the box. We've developed the first partnership with a public school where we're helping them get buses that they cannot get through LAUSD to take 150 of their students onto buses and out of cars. We've also providing carpool software to the other public schools in the area as well as the independent schools. We've done a lot in working with them to make this happen. Now, I know that we don't have much time, so I want to very quickly have all those that are here in support of Brentwood School, please stand up. And I want to make note that about half as many of these people have had to leave because they've had to go home to have dinner with their children. Thank you. And Kristen, could you bring the letters up? These are letters of support for the project that have come from all the people that knew they would not be here today, and I think it's quite substantial. We've been working at this a long time. Now I'd like to invite up Pat Gibson, who has been our traffic consultant and has been working in the city of Los Angeles for 45 years, and many call the guru of traffic in Los Angeles. Pat?
Thank you. Mr. Gibson, you have about a minute and 30 seconds left in your presentation.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to quickly summarize the key elements of the transportation plan. The centerpiece of the plan is a trip cap. Limits the number of trips to and from this school every day. Different than other trip caps you've seen because this one requires a reduction in traffic, a 40% reduction in traffic. We've agreed to monitor these trips every day to be reviewed by an independent third party and reported to LADOT twice a year. We've agreed to increase busing to 40% of our students starting next year. Where you've heard we're going to assist other public schools in the area with carpooling and busing, again, to reduce trips in the corridor. We have agreed to monitor trips and control trips for 5.5 hours every day. We've agreed to move our special events out of the peak hours to evenings and weekends. We'll enforce the most stringent carpool requirements of any school in Los Angeles. Finally, the school has agreed to work with the Veterans Administration to take our construction traffic through the VA and totally off Sunset Boulevard. What Brentwood School is committing to here is the most stringent transportation management program of any school in Southern California. This represents a reduction in traffic, period, 40%.
Thank you very much. Okay. This is something that I'm going to request some cooperation. I've read the file. I've listened to testimony on this. The Council District 11 has proposed some changes. We're inclined, or I'm inclined if my colleagues so agree, if they have any questions. Do you have any questions or comments? If you're so inclined, I was going to move that we deny in part and grant in part the appeal, incorporate CD11 recommendations for the Brentwood School to approve the proposed amendments to the conditions of approval and adopt the revised sequel findings. But before I do that, we do have a number of speakers here, and I would ask for those who agree with that direction that you waive your time to speak, because we're about to lose quorum, and if we lose quorum, we cannot proceed on that action. But I do want to afford people the opportunity to speak if they want to speak. You could come up here and line up, but then again, those who are supportive of the school, like I said, and the motion we made, probably wouldn't want to speak because we may lose quorum, and that's a direction we're going in. So that's just a fair warning. Anybody who submitted a card and wishes could speak could come up and speak at this time. Yes.
Can the planning department just come up and make a quick
comment?
Sure.
Lucy Barra with the Planning Department. The Department of City Planning was notified of the changes by Council District 11, as noted in the record. I just want to clarify that upon review, we found some minor typos, and we recommend that there are additional changes to the findings be made just to clarify existing conditions and changes to the conditions and the findings. So when you act, if you could please instruct the planning department to formally submit these corrections to the city clerk so that they could be included in the council file before the action. And then I just wanted to add that, the conditions of approval as proposed by CD11 were vetted through the Department of Transportation, and they did conclude that they were amenable to the changes, and it doesn't change any conclusions in the CEQA analysis.
Okay, thank you. David Holtzman.
Chairman Rizzo, before you start the clock, a couple of procedural matters.
Sure.
First of all, nothing submitted by CD11 was properly noticed for this meeting, so you may not take action on a CD11 proposal. You and I both know as lawyers that you need to notice such...
Yeah, your time should start if you're going to make those comments.
It's a procedural matter, and also on the limiting time for comments also may be a violation of due process here. You may have also lost your quorum before, because I saw a council member to your left sleeping during my wife's comments. She's one of the appellants. For that reason alone, for those reasons alone, I think, and you'll already have 2 members missing, I would appreciate it if you would at least put this vote over, and so you can have a full record and a full committee to hear the matter.
Your time is running, Mr. Holtzman. I have to.
I didn't realize it was running. All right, you're sitting as an appeals court. You're not supposed to, on the appeals, you're not supposed to be, could you ask her to restart the clock, please? I didn't realize my time was running. Would you please?
Yeah, I'll give you 30 more seconds, Mr. Holtzman. I'm trying to.
I have 3 substantive points. We've split these up. The bus trading system it reminds me of the environmental injustice of a pollution trading system. This one would pack public school kids onto buses so private school kids can clog up the road area at issue in their fancy cars. Point two, you should stick with the Planning Commission's daily trips cap. We're talking about daily traffic here, and using a long-term average would allow for wide variations. 3, do not let the -1 equals never, the first row in the yellow chart, ever take effect. It would make that 40% a lie. The 40% you've heard is a lie. Yes, there were side deals cut by 2 small groups in Brentwood, but they have conflicts of interest and or are barely affected by the traffic at issue here. The council office disingenuously negotiated with the Brentwood Community Council. That staffer you saw went around the BCC's negotiators improperly to try and get concessions from the president. So seriously, the most sensible thing for you to do now would be to deny all the appeals or deny the appeals and accept my wife's appeal. Lauren Coles.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Thelma Waxman, and I live next door to Archer School for Girls and down the street from Brentwood School. And in the interest of time, I'd ask you for 2 things. One is to reinstate the parking reservation system that Archer has agreed to. And second is, if the school indeed intends to cut traffic by 40%, then why should it be tied to a number that they may never attain, and it should be required with permitted students the way CPC had originally written it? Thank you.
Welcome.
My name is Terry Redmond-Kahn. I worked at Brentwood School for over 20 years, and I'm currently faculty emeritus at the school. I love the school, and I think that we're very close to having an agreement. But I live in Mandeville Canyon, which is at the western edge of Brentwood, and it always takes me at least an hour to get from my house to the 405, which is only 2 miles, on any night when Brentwood School is in session. And you could really tell the difference between when they're in session and when they're on vacation. I have just a couple of points. I was the one who handed these out to you, and it really clearly lays out where the problems are. These seem like minor problems, but these are actually the stitches that hold the whole agreement together. By changing the language to actual enrollment from permitted enrollment, we could never get to the actual enrollment that would kick in everything else upon which this agreement hinges. So that I think is the biggest problem that we have, and it's really a matter of changing one word. Also, my friend talked about the trip cap. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jesse Creed, and I'm here with Larry Van Kuren, a Vietnam veteran and a VSO representative. We're here as members of the Community Veteran Oversight and Engagement Board. This board was established by pursuant to federal law, the West Los Angeles Leasing Act, to bring more transparency, accountability, and community engagement to the Westwood VA campus. We're responsible for providing advice and recommendations on the implementation of the draft master plan to the Secretary. We work closely with the VA and have a good working relationship with them. To be clear, we're not here in support or opposition of the project or the merits of the project related to the CUP or the Brentwood School Expansion Project. We are here to speak about the access to the West LA VA campus by construction trucks. We are relieved to hear from Councilmember Bonin's office that will not be a condition of approval to the CUP as a traffic mitigation effort. However, if there is going to be access in the future, the CVOB needs to be consulted with related to the terms and conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, folks. My name is Ernie Hilger. I'm a 53-year disabled veteran. Here's what I have to say. The CUP presented here today, Council File 170020, is the work product of a flawed process which is in violation of a bipartisan, bicameral federal law 5936 and the veteran-centric only policy for the West LA VA, signed by the President on September 29th, 2016, into law. This legislation codifies the legislated changes, complete with timelines for construction and integrated veterans medical care for the renewal of the veteran-centric only rededicated National Soldiers Home on the West LA VA campus. The legislation spells out the communication process and is very specific to build trust between veterans, the community, and the VA, and to keep all parties on the same page.
Thank you.
To prevent masters of their own interests from taking over. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Francisco Juarez. Planner Nuno Ordano, please share the old veteran guard objection letter with the commissioners. We, the grassroots veteran advocates, deliver this objection, and all who oppose it are either grossly misinformed or accomplices to the willful dismantling of the best symbol of sacred trust. You must decide whether our message has merit enough to responsibly delay what will be a huge mistake. The suicide rate of veterans is 22 a day. The sounds of popping Huey blades and diesel trucks cause flashbacks, and flashbacks leads to depression, and that leads to more suicide. Moreover, the unique home was permanently established for the healing of disabled veterans, not for the expansion of a private school. My battery died because I've been waiting all day.
Yeah, sorry about that, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your time is up, sir. Thank you very much. Next speaker.
If you
Next
approve
speaker. Thank you.
The blood of veterans will be on your hands.
Thank you very much, sir.
Good evening, council members. My name is Eric Edmonds. I am the Vice President of Brentwood Hills Homeowners Association. We're a community of 450 homes in Brentwood affected by what has become the intolerable traffic conditions on Sunset. We're here to urge you to uphold the conditions originally opposed by the Planning Commission and not water them down or dilute them as has been proposed here. We agree, by the way, with the comments of Lauren Cole a moment ago and with all of her points. It is counterintuitive to say that increasing enrollment and increasing construction density will reduce traffic. It's simply illogical. We urge you not to water down the conditions of the Planning Commission or agree to the deal entered into by the council office, and instead you should uphold the original conditions. They were well conceived and well founded.
Great. Thank you. Our last speaker is Sophia Wright. And you gentlemen in the back, you could sit down and not disrupt the meeting. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
My name is Sophia Wright, and my husband and I live within less than 500 feet of the Brentwood School West campus and about half a mile from the East campus. To say that we and the entire neighborhood will be affected by Brentwood School's massive expansion is an understatement. Since traffic is one of the main issues in our area, I asked the committee that you reject the changes proposed by CD 11 to the traffic-related conditions in the CPC determination letter. The proposed changes are based on false claims that the new conditions will reduce traffic impacts when in fact the impacts will be worse than as proposed by the conditions of the CPC letter. I also urge the committee to reject the out-of-scale drastic height variations that have been approved by the Planning Commission. And 80 feet and 54 feet school buildings are not only not comparable with residential homes, but also violate the city code, which mandates that residential zoning must apply to all structures in the residential area.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment period. There's a motion on the floor to deny in part, grant in part the appeal filed by the Brentwood School, approve the proposed amendments to the conditions of approval, and adopt the revised CEQA findings. For the record, the gentleman who's up here, he already had spoken in the earlier portion of the meeting for his different agenda items and does not qualify to speak again. Any objections to that? Yes.
And to also include planning department just cleaning up those,
Yes.
those typos and things.
Any objections? Seeing none, so ordered. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. We have
Item 2.
item 2. Can the applicant and the appellants, are they here?
No, item 2 is a zone change, Councilor.
It's a zone change, okay. We will
Yes.
continue item 2 to next week.
Okay.
And seeing that we have no more quorum, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
For this particular item? Yeah, I remember you put in a for general public comment. You know what happened is they're not going to hear it.